Chapter 806. Why are you in such a hurry to tell me? Why are you in the mood to come to the riverside today? But this place is too remote, Zhou Qingyun said as she sat in the front passenger seat with one hand holding her hair. At this time, Zhou Qingyun had matured a lot. After all, the two had graduated 5 or 6 years ago. With some support, Zhou Qingyun was now in the middle management position of the company. Naturally, she couldn't compare to Ren Wanyan, but compared to her classmates, it was already very fast. Zhou Qingyun looked at Ren Wanyan's serious side profile and felt a little uneasy. Before coming here, she had guessed that he called her out in such a hurry to give her a surprise, such as a marriage proposal. She was a little hesitant. But looking at his expression now, it didn't seem like it. Or maybe he really wanted to give her a surprise and deliberately created such a serious atmosphere. This thought only flashed in her mind. Ren Wanyan had never been such a romantic person, otherwise, she wouldn't have. Ren Wanyan didn't speak. Although his hands were on the steering wheel, it was just a habitual action. The car was completely moving on its own. He just remained silent and pondered over his own matters. When the car began to slow down, 2 cars could be seen parked in front of them. Ren Wanyan didn't turn his head and just said this plainly before pushing the door open and getting out of the car. Zhou Qingyun's heart sank as she looked at the few burly men standing beside the 2 cars in front of her. She pressed one hand on the communication device on her wrist. Don't play these little tricks. After so many years, you should understand. Ren Wanyan stood in front of the car and turned his head to speak to her through the glass. Zhou Qingyun's face darkened. After so many years, although Ren Wanyan rarely told her anything, she did understand his power. He didn't belong to the country, nor was he an entrepreneur or a tycoon, but he had an unfathomable influence. However, she still stubbornly pressed the call to the police on the communication device. There was no response. This made her wonder if the communication device was malfunctioning. Looking at Ren Wanyan, who stood in front of the car without saying a word, she finally understood that he had blocked the signal here. It was just for her. Why would he do this? Zhou Qingyun had already guessed that the other party knew what she wanted to hide, but she didn't know why the other party would block the signal just for her. This made her panic and she sat there motionlessly until Ren Wanyan came over to open the car door. Like a gentleman, he stretched out his hand and said, "Come down." What's going on? Zhou Qingyun suppressed the panic in her heart and tried to act like she didn't understand. Ren Wanyan waited for her to get out of the car before he withdrew his hand that was tightly held by her and said faintly, "I want to know why." It's been 7 years. It's been 7 years since we first confirmed our relationship. From our school days until now, I shouldn't have done anything wrong to you. Why are you doing this? Could this be the so-called 7-year itch? His tone was full of self-deprecation. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Zhou Qingyun said in a panic. Bring them down, Ren Wanyan said to the 2 cars not far away. Zhou Qingyun's heart sank to the bottom. There were a few people standing beside the other 2 cars. One of them was Ding Jia. Today, Ding Jia was strong and had a calm temperament. He was no longer the bean sprout he used to be. He wore a pair of metal half-rimmed glasses to block his aggressive gaze. The moment she saw Ding Jia, she already knew that something was wrong. A winged cavalry warrior carried a person out of the back seat of the car. It was a blond man who was tied up tightly and had his mouth covered. This guy looks pretty good. Ding Jia looked at the blond man and smiled. He touched his face and added, although he's not as good as me. In the past, Ren Wanyan would definitely ridicule Ding Jia for being so narcissistic. However, he wasn't smiling at this time. He looked at Zhou Qingyun and said, "Do you understand now?" Zhou Qingyun bit her lip and turned pale. "Since you understand, this person is useless. Let's sink." The scenery here is not bad. There's water in front and mountains behind. The surroundings are spacious and suitable for living, Ren Wanyan said faintly. Zhou Qingyun was shocked by Ren Wanyan's calm words and looked at him incredulously. Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing? The Ren Wanyan in front of her was extremely unfamiliar to her. It was as if the person in front of her was only a layer of skin. He was the person who shared a bed with her, but inside, he was a completely different person. I should be asking if you know what you've done. Ren Wanyan's heart was in so much pain that his eyebrows twitched unnaturally. What did I do? So what if I fell in love with someone else? What kind of society is this? Even if I fell in love with someone else, we can just break up. Break up? I'm telling you now, we broke up. We have nothing to do with each other. Don't think that I can't live without you. Zhou Qingyun seemed to have broken her nerves and roared hysterically like an enraged lioness. He's more handsome than you, more eloquent than you, more romantic than you, and his *SS is bigger than yours. What's wrong? I did cheat on him. Ren Wanyan heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Zhou Qingyun rambling in anger. If that was the case, we wouldn't have met today. You didn't notice his identity at all? Did he look into my affairs? Have you looked into my brother's affairs? Did he investigate things that you shouldn't know? I should have noticed it long ago. I should have noticed it when you asked about things that you didn't ask about in the past. Ren Wanyan looked at Zhou Qingyun coldly and said, You didn't just betray me. Do you know who told me about your affair? It was the country. You betrayed your country for such a person. Of course, making me a cuckold was just a bonus. Upon hearing Ren Wanyan's words, Zhou Qingyun's face immediately turned pale. Is there anything else you want to say? On account of our 7 years of relationship, I'll listen to you. Ren Wanyan put a cigarette in his mouth, lit it, took a deep puff, and exhaled a long puff of smoke. Ding Jia, who was beside him, had already tied a thick iron chain to the man's body. It was enough to make him sink into the river and not have a chance to float up. The man wanted to struggle, but it was useless. The winged cavalry warrior only needed to kick him to immobilize him. If they didn't want him to sink into the river alive, this kick would have crushed him. Throw him down, Ding Jia said softly. His lips were slightly pale, and it was obvious that he wasn't as calm as he looked. Although he had done many things over the years, this was the first time he had done something like this. However, this time, he had volunteered to rush back from Wuji City. One of the winged cavalry warriors revealed a kind smile as if he had seen the child next door grow up. He grabbed the man like he was grabbing a toy, twisted his waist, and threw him more than 100 meters into the river. Plop! The man didn't make any sound from the beginning to the end. Perhaps he had prayed, but it was all stuffed in his mouth. Just like that, a person disappeared from this world just like that. Of course, if he was lucky, he might be able to see the light of day again in a few days, weeks, months, or years. You lunatics! Zhou Qingyun screamed in fear. I used to call you sister-in-law. You have to know that killing a spy is the right thing to do. It's not only in line with our interests, but also in line with the interests of the country. Although we won't receive a medal for this, no one will blame us for it. Ding Jia took out a cigar that was as thick as a finger, lit it with a gun, and took a puff. He felt the smell of tobacco in his mouth before spitting it out. Other than the smell of tobacco, there was also the taste of butter in his mouth. This was the taste that he liked and made him feel very relaxed. Yes, he's a spy from the United States. So what I don't understand is, even if you wanted to make me a cuckold, why did you get involved with him? Ren Wanyan looked down at Zhou Qingyun, who was kneeling on the ground, with a pained look in his eyes. Why? Why? Zhou Qingyun was no longer hysterical and muttered to herself. Her chuckle was full of mockery, and it was unclear whether she was mocking herself or Ren Wanyan. Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you hide everything from me? I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know what you're doing. You already knew about those life force techniques, right? That's right, you already knew about them. Looking at your current situation, I know that you already knew about them. Even your parents already knew about it, right? When you brought me to your house, I noticed that they were different from ordinary people. But did you tell me that I slept in the same bed with you every day? Did you get the martial arts techniques from the military and the police system? But I'm still an ordinary person now. Have you ever thought about it? Tell me, why did I betray you? Do I still need to tell you? Zhou Qingyun looked up at Ren Baqian with a face full of hatred. Ren Wanyan never thought that this expression would appear on her face. Furthermore, this hatred was directed at himself. My brother will get married within a year, Ren Wanyan said. After he gets married, it will be our turn. I will tell you what you can know and find a way to get the martial arts techniques for you. However, there are some things that I can't tell you now. Looking at the sneer on Zhou Qingyun's face, Ren Wanyan finally sighed. When the wind blows, the smell of the cigar is blown away. Without the lingering smoke, it's a lot less enjoyable. I'd better go back to the car, Ding Jia said before returning to the car. Ren Wanyan stood there with his head lowered, looking like a fossil in the wind. His expression was uncertain, and he wanted to make up his mind several times. However, he couldn't open his mouth when he saw the person sneering at him on the ground. You should go. Don't appear in Shanghai again. Don't let me see you again, and don't break ties with people you shouldn't have. If there's a next time, even if I let you go, the country won't let you go. After saying this, Ren Wanyan let out a long sigh, returned to the car without looking back, and left. Chapter 807. When Ren Baqian returned to Earth, he saw Ren Wanyan. Ren Baqian changed his clothes and walked downstairs to the living room. He saw Ren Wanyan sitting there cautiously. The Empress, who had just changed her clothes and was holding onto an ice cream, was sitting on the sofa beside him. Even though a few years had passed and he had experienced many things and met many people, he was still very reserved in front of his sister-in-law. The more Ren Baqian met with all kinds of people, including bureaucrats, entrepreneurs, and tycoons, the more he felt that the Empress was different from the rest. This wasn't the kind of bearing and majesty that could be cultivated by people with little power or some wealth. Ren Baqian glanced at Ren Wanyan. Ren Wanyan's hair was tidy, and his previously clean-shaven chin now had short stubble. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked a little weathered. As expected, a man would only grow up after going through a woman. However, this made him feel a little conflicted. All the hair on his body had fallen off, and now when he saw other people with long beards, he always wanted to shave them. Did you wait for a long time? Ren Baqian asked as he sat on the sofa. I guess you'll be back in 2 days. Up until now, Ren Wanyan still didn't know where Ren Baqian had gone. He also didn't know why Ren Baqian and his sister-in-law had come downstairs while he was still here. Even though he was infuriated, he didn't say anything. If he could tell her, he would tell her in the future. Well, you came just in time. Let's have dinner together tonight. I'll cook, Ren Baqian said with great interest. All right, I'll be your assistant. Ren Wanyan didn't stand on ceremony at all. In the living room, Ren Baqian were cooking while the Empress was curled up on the sofa and playing with her phone. Although there were already watch-shaped communicators that could be projected onto any surface, many people still preferred this kind of rectangular mobile phone. After all, 2018 was only 10 years away. Just like 10 years ago, there were still people who used old-fashioned computers. Now, there were also people who used brick-like cheap old computers. Not everyone can accept new technology. The Empress hadn't been to Earth many times. It was already pretty good that she could use her mobile phone as well as the people on Earth. After a while, the smile on his face disappeared. I let her go. Oh. Renbochin responded faintly. In fact, he didn't care about this matter at all. Zhou Qingyun was just a small fry. Although she was related to Ren Wanyan, she was still an insignificant character and couldn't enter Renbochin's eyes. He didn't care about her life or death at all. At that time, after Yang Xin finished speaking, he took a long time to recall the other party's name. After Ren Wanyan finished speaking, he lowered his head. He waited for a long time but didn't hear anything else. Then, he looked up at Renbochin and said, I thought you would reprimand me. Renbochin thought about it carefully and decided to use this small matter to teach his younger brother a lesson. Those who achieve great things don't bother about trifles. This means that those who achieve great things give up things that they don't think are important. Some people valued power and ambition more, while others valued kinship, morality, and bottom line more. It was all personal choices, and there was no right or wrong. The only thing you need to care about is that everything you do has consequences, and you have to be able to bear the consequences. Don't let your family and friends take the blame for your wrongdoings. Brother, thank you. I understand. She didn't get any information from me. Even if she did, it was unimportant. I don't think it would have a big impact, so I let her go. I know it was wrong to do so, but she's just an ordinary person. I believe that after this incident, she won't have the chance to do these things again. Those countries and those spies won't bother with a worthless person. Even if they do, it doesn't matter. What happens in the future has nothing to do with me. Ren Wanyan looked conflicted. It seemed that after half a month, he still couldn't let go of Zhou Qingyun. After all, it was a 7-year relationship. It wasn't easy to let go. Renbochin waved his hand and said, You don't have to explain to me. You know what you're doing. Brother, can you let her go? Ren Wanyan looked at Renbochin with a pleading look. Haven't you already let her go? Renbochin smiled and said. Brother, you won't send someone to drown her in the river, right? Ren Wanyan asked cautiously. If it was Renbochin 10 years ago, he naturally wouldn't do such a thing. However, he couldn't understand the current Renbochin at all. Just like when Zhou Qingyun said that she didn't know what her brother was doing or thinking. Renbochin tilted his head. Don't worry, I'm a good person. I'm a good person, that's right. Although he had killed many people and wiped out entire clans, it did not stop him from being a good person. Ren Wanyan looked at the shiny bald head and ferocious-looking face in front of him. Alright, his brother was definitely a good person, just that he didn't look like one. But this had nothing to do with whether he was a good person or not. Will the country do something to her? Renbochin rested his chin on his hand and looked at Ren Wanyan. He didn't realize that his younger brother was a sentimental person. Renbochin didn't consider whether or not his country would make a move on her, nor did he care. Brother, I know you have a lot of influence. Can you ask them to let her off? Ren Wanyan pleaded. Do you think I can influence the country? Where did you get this misconception? Renbochin's face suddenly turned serious, giving Ren Wanyan a shock. Although some small matters could indeed affect some people, he didn't want Ren Wanyan to have this kind of thinking. Brother, otherwise, why would you let us handle this matter ourselves? Ren Wanyan continued to look at Renbochin with a pleading gaze. It's just a little preferential treatment for family members. A country has its laws, and a family has its rules. The country naturally has its own system for this matter. Don't think that you can influence the system and laws, Renbochin said sternly. Ren Wanyan struggled for a long time before clenching his teeth and saying, Brother, I understand. Okay. Renbochin nodded his head gently and laughed. Don't think too much. You are still so young, and you should enjoy a good life. For example, there are a few clubs that are pretty good. I will give you my name card later, and you can go there when you are free. The Empress raised her head and looked at Rinpochen before looking at him again. What's a club? What does it do? Bring me there to broaden my horizons. Rinpochen was speechless. The Empress was unexpectedly sharp in this aspect. Could this be called a woman's intuition? It's a place where some so-called industry elites spend their time. Rinpochen's expression didn't change as he said, previously, some so-called successful people invited me there, but I wasn't interested. I see that Wanyan isn't in a good mood, so why not go there and maybe meet a lady from a respectable family who can make him fall in love with her? It was hard to say whether he would fall in love with her, but it was definitely not a problem to fall in love with her. There were only things that you couldn't think of, but there was nothing that couldn't be played. The clubs nowadays were more professional than Dadong 10 years ago. After all, times were always improving. The Empress looked at Rinpochen doubtfully. After making sure that he wasn't deceiving her, she lowered her head and continued to play with her phone. Rinpochen winked at his brother. Ren Wanyan's mood inexplicably improved a little. It wasn't because of the club. It really wasn't because of the club. Important things should be said again. It was because he was always reserved in front of his sister-in-law. Now, it seemed that even his brother couldn't do it. He took out a cigarette and wanted to light it, but remembered that his sister-in-law was still beside him, so he put it back. Where's Lin Chaola? After a while, the Empress suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen her for so long. She should have gone to play with her friends. Rinpochen said casually. Now, Lin Chaola's friends weren't just huskies. They were all the canines within a radius of 2 kilometers. Rinpochen had always been curious about how this so-called chinchilla became the leader of the pack of hyenas. However, considering her strength, it wasn't surprising that she became the leader of the hyenas. He just didn't know why she only liked to play with canines and not cats. He originally thought that she would like cats. After settling Ren Wanyan's matter, Rinpochen didn't ask Yang Sin how he would deal with Zhou Qingyun. He guessed that it would be surveillance. If she continued to live as an ordinary person from now on, nothing would happen to her. If anything happened, he didn't need to care about her fate. The next day, Rinpochen happily went shopping with the Empress. They bought matching clothes, necklaces, rings, earrings, and underwear. In order to match the Empress, he specially bought a set of bright red clothes. Imagine a strong man who weighed more than 150 kilograms, had a bald head, no hair, no beard, and a fierce-looking face wearing bright red clothes. The scene was refreshing. When the two of them walked, the people in front of them naturally made way for them. The Empress didn't even need to use her own means to get the pedestrians to give way. The Empress walked with Rinpochen with a cold and helpless look on her face. There was a string of necklaces on her neck and fingers. Those who didn't know better would think that they were too nouveau riche. Rinpochen might be considered rich, but the Empress wasn't. Since her grandfather's generation, she was the third generation of the imperial family and had received royal education. Even though Dayo's royal education only taught one thing, the fist is the law. At this moment, they were on the way back to Lon City. Preparations were already in full swing, and it was estimated that the wedding would take place in 2 months. Rinpochen was in a good mood on the way back and wondered if he should play some tricks during the wedding. However, before that, he had to think about whether he should take a wedding photo or something. When the time came, he would hang it on the city wall of Lon City. Chapter 808. Suyi, it's done. The new parts have been changed, a burly man wearing an official's uniform said as he walked over to a young man. Although he had the face of a young man and had a scholarly name, his figure wasn't thin or weak at all. It should be said that the Aboriginals didn't have any thin or weak people. No matter how weak they were still stronger than the commoners and even some low-level warriors from other countries. The only thing that limited them was that their brains were also full of muscles. This is good news. The young man called Suyi smiled, put aside the book in his hand, turned around, and walked into the house behind him with the burly man. Although it was called a house, it was much bigger than a normal house. It covered an area of at least 2,000 square meters and was built with stones. The stones were filled with a material called cement, and the irregular stones were glued together to form a house. The house was supported by stone pillars. There were many protrusions on the stone pillars, and it was obvious that they hadn't been polished meticulously. Some of the sharp corners were broken off, leaving jagged protrusions that looked like scars. In addition, there was a huge set of steel equipment in the house. Although it looked crude, it had a unique sense of beauty. Huge rivets were embedded in it, and there were also rows of pipes. It was full of a steampunk style. If Rinpoche saw it, he definitely wouldn't be able to recognize that it was designed by himself. However, he had to admit that even though this set of equipment was crude, it looked very cool. In addition, there were dozens of burly men standing in this huge house, or rather, the factory building. All of them had happy expressions on their faces. The young man called C carefully checked the equipment before taking a few steps back and saying, "It seems like there are no problems. Let's start. Let's see how it goes this time." After 2 hours, thick black smoke was emitted from the chimney above the factory building. Following which, a rhythmic roar resounded in the factory building, as if huge pieces of steel were colliding with each other. In the distance, some emaciated prisoners of war with faces full of suffering were carrying shoulder poles with both ends filled with heavy ores. They were staggering toward a certain place where the ores were stored. When they heard the loud roar, they raised their heads and looked at the place where they were forbidden to approach. They didn't know what was going on inside. After a while, Siyi looked at the long saber in her hand. It did not have a hilt. Instead, the hilt was just an iron rod, waiting to be fitted with a real hilt. There was no sharpened edge, and there was no danger when one touched it with their fingers. It didn't even have the beautiful overlapping patterns on handmade swords. There were only rough and ugly suppression patterns. However, the shape of this blade was completely molded by a grinding tool, and after cooling, it was forged by a huge mechanical hammer. An ordinary craftsman could make at most 2 or 3 saber embryos a day. With such a machine, as long as there were enough raw materials and no problems with the equipment, it would be able to create more than 3,000 of these saber embryos in a day. The only thing left to do was to install the wooden hilt, wrap the animal skin around it, and sharpen the blade. In this way, 100 apprentices could do what 1,000 craftsmen could do in the past. The accompanying official from the Ministry of Works was also holding a saber embryo like this. He kept stroking it with his hand, and his eyes were filled with joy. It was as if he was holding a beauty instead of a saber embryo. "Suyi, you have made a great contribution this time. I will naturally report this to the higher-ups. Given your abilities, you can work at the Ministry of Works after you have completed your studies. You will definitely have a good position there," the official said to Suyi. Suyi did not feel any aversion to working at the Ministry of Works. As a commoner without any talent, this was a good position that he could never have imagined. However, he had not even graduated yet, and such a position was already within his grasp. He understood that he had displayed amazing abilities during the construction of this saber forging factory. That was why the other party was so eager to invite him to work at the Ministry of Works. However, this ability was something that most students could do. This time, it was not the Ministry of Works that found him, but Tong Lan. That lass with a small fist was hard. If not for the fact that he could not defeat her, he would have been researching how to improve the generator at the school, instead of building this set of equipment in the mines of the Yun Nation. The steam engine, the forging equipment driven by the steam engine, and he had also participated in the construction of some blast furnaces. Although he was forced to do this with his fists, the gains were not small. On the one hand, he was able to transform what he had learned into tangible objects, which really produced exciting results. On the other hand, he had a considerable understanding and confidence of what he could do. He believed that he could do better than most people in the Ministry of Works. However, this was still a little early for him. As for when he could graduate, he had no idea at all. Yagüe did not say how many years it would take. Furthermore, even if he did say that he would graduate in a few years, whether he would graduate or not depended on whether that unreliable principal would run around. I will wait here for another 3 days. If there is nothing else, I will be leaving. I heard that Her Majesty and Principal are on their way back to Lawn City. I have to go back before them, Yi said to the official from the Ministry of Works. What if there is a problem with this thing? The official asked subconsciously. This machine looked simple to Yi, but it was not simple at all in his eyes. It could even be said to be Dayo's top secret. With the blast furnaces and these machines, Dayo's lack of craftsmen was finally alleviated. At the same time, the official from the Ministry of Works was very careful, afraid that something would go wrong with this high-tech machine. You all know how to manufacture this thing from the beginning to the end. Replace the parts that are broken as long as there is no problem with the size of the parts. I will also teach them over the next few days, Yi said. I hope they can learn it, the official from the Ministry of Works said. Even though he was an official from the Ministry of Works, he was more than capable of waving his fists around and beating someone up. He was also full of confidence in the group of people he was opposing. However, he was still a little unconfident in this matter. It's not that difficult. Yi imitated Yagüe and revealed a faint smile. Although they all called Principal Yagüe, in their hearts, he was like an evil spirit in those stories. However, they had to admit that he was really knowledgeable. It could be said that they had never seen anyone who knew more than Yagüe. Although Yagüe was often unreliable, his mind was full of wisdom. As a result, they would often imitate some of Yagüe's actions, intentionally or unintentionally. They thanked their ancestors for allowing Yagüe to appear in Dayo. A few days later, Yi and a few other students embarked on their journey back to Lawn City in high spirits. Yi, have you finished your homework? On the way back, one of the students suddenly remembered something. Yi's movements suddenly froze. Like a robot, he slowly turned his neck to look at his companions. The few of them looked at each other in dismay. Following which, a look of pain and despair appeared on their faces. This sudden memory was too heart-wrenching, and they were so anxious that their hearts jumped 10 meters high. Chapter 809. At this time, Renbachyan was running and jumping in the forest. From time to time, he would see bricks floating in the air without any support. When he hit it with his head, which was wearing a helmet, the bricks would shatter, and his head could feel the impact of hitting a heavy object. After smashing a brick, there was a turtle crawling toward him on the ground in front of him. It seemed to be about the same size and speed as him, and its crawling speed wasn't slow either. Renbachyan nimbly turned in the air, stepped on the back of the turtle, and continued to run forward. In front of him was an endless sea of turtles, as if he had encountered an army of turtles. After a long time, Renbachyan, who had eaten a mushroom and crashed through the army of turtles, took off his helmet and smacked his lips as if he hadn't had enough. Very interesting. I didn't expect you to come up with such an interesting thing. This is just Super Mario. A researcher in a white coat said calmly with joy on his face. However, his expression seemed to be telling Renbachyan, praise me a few more times. Amazing. Renbachyan said seriously. He didn't expect this so-called immature brain control technology to reach such a level. Although there were still some differences between the sense of touch and reality, he could already feel the feedback of his body touching things in the game. This is an epic-making technology. Ren Boqian repeated again. I tried it before and was also very surprised. Ren Wanyan exclaimed in admiration behind him. Then, he asked in an incredulous voice, this technology has been authorized to us. It was conceivable that once this technology was introduced, it would bring in countless profits. Yes, it has been authorized to us, but there are restrictions. We are only doing games and smart homes. We have nothing to do with the new communication devices, vehicles, and mechanical control devices. Furthermore, we have to hand over a portion of the profits. Although Rinpoche said this, he was very satisfied. Although many things were still in the hands of the country because they involved too many areas, the little that leaked out was enough for him to become one of the top tycoons in this world. Although his focus was on Dayo, the foundation of this world was also of great value. You can recruit some people, come up with a good plan, and create a real second world. With this technology, even a pile of sh*t can make people enjoy it so much that they forget to leave. But I really don't want to make a pile of shit. Ren Boqian turned his head and said. In the past, he had also read many online games and wondered if he could experience the world in the novels. He didn't expect this technology to appear so soon, and it was in his hands. Got it. I will definitely work hard, Ren Wanyan said with an excited expression. If I read more online novels, I might be able to gain something. Ren Boqian nodded his head and turned to look at young senator. That fellow was grinning so widely that his front teeth were exposed. It was obvious that he was very proud of this technology. Although the laboratory was managed by someone else, it was under his department, so he couldn't get away from it. Then, he looked at a few new research results. At that time, in the cooperation with the country, he had the right to know about the research based on the things he brought back. At this moment, it seemed that the right to know had played its due role. For example, the metal growth technology. The laboratory had already researched how to grow some rare metals. It was also an epic-making technology. Unfortunately, there was also a huge flaw. The grown parts could only last for 3 days before collapsing. After walking around the laboratory, Ren Boqian wanted to leave. Yang Sen stepped forward and said, Mr. Ren, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about. Oh. Ren Boqian was a little suspicious. He thought for a while and said to Ren Wanyan, wait for me outside. Okay. Ren Wanyan nodded. When he arrived at Yang Sen's office, Ren Boqian sat on the sofa. The sofa emitted a heavy sound, which made Yang Sen's eyes twitch. He wondered if he should change to a sturdier sofa. Speak. Ren Boqian said. It's about that Zhou Qingyun. Yang Sen sat on another sofa and took out a cigarette. Ren Boqian thought for 3 seconds before remembering who it was. There's a follow-up. Yang Sen nodded. The spy disappeared for half a year. Now, the U.S. intelligence agency has sent someone to contact her again. Ren Boqian looked at Yang Sen and waited for him to continue. The other party obtained a hard drive from her. We don't know what's inside the hard drive, but it must be valuable, Yang Sen said. He also couldn't figure out what information Zhou Qingyun obtained from Ren Wanyan. However, no matter what it was, it couldn't be obtained by the U.S. You just watched them take the hard drive from her? Ren Boqian asked. Then, he asked doubtfully, why didn't they send it over the internet, but instead use something like a hard drive? Her computer and mobile phone are under our control. If we discovered these things, she definitely wouldn't have the opportunity to send them out. Even if she wanted to borrow other tools, she wouldn't have the opportunity. She might not know this, but she's very cautious, Yang Sen said. As for why he watched the spy take the information from her, he didn't answer. However, Ren Boqian guessed it quickly. You used her to fish, but the fish ran away. Although Yang Sin tried his best to hide it, he looked a little embarrassed. It didn't run away. It's still under our control. It's just that we want to dig deeper along this line. Can you really catch it? Ren Baqian was a little doubtful. Don't underestimate the power of the country, Yang Sin said solemnly. The country had taken that step and had now trained many experts. Some of these experts were originally from intelligence agents or security departments. If they were released, they would be even more 007 than 007. They were simply the saints of 007, and those foreign intelligence agents couldn't be compared to them. Although they had neglected this at the beginning, now that they had mobilized those people, the other party definitely wouldn't have another chance. Ren Baqian spread his hands and asked, "Then why are you telling me all this?" Zhou Qingyun has already violated the law, Yang Sin continued with a righteous face. Then you guys can deal with it, Ren Baqian said indifferently. Since Mr. Ren has such an attitude, then it's easy to deal with it. Yang Sin was really afraid that Ren Baqian would have other ideas because of this matter. After all, he had already given the right to deal with it to Ren Baqian. If he went back and arrested her, it would easily make the other party unhappy. Even if Ren Baqian didn't care about this matter, Ren Wanyan was his younger brother, and they had a good relationship. Yang Sin didn't want this matter to have any negative effects. What will you do if you catch her? Ren Baqian asked curiously. He was asking this question on behalf of Ren Wanyan. Article 110 of the criminal law stipulates that anyone who commits any of the following acts of espionage that endanger national security shall be sentenced to imprisonment of more than 10 years or life imprisonment. If the circumstances are relatively minor, he shall be sentenced to imprisonment of more than 3 years and less than 10 years. 1. Joining an espionage organization or accepting a mission from an espionage organization or its agent wink with a frown. 2. Directing the enemy to bombard a target. Article 113 among the crimes of endangering national security mentioned in this chapter, except for the second paragraph of Article 103, Article 105, Article 107, and Article 109, those who cause serious harm to the country and the people and the circumstances are especially abominable may be sentenced to death. Yang Sin recited the legal provisions to Ren Baqian with a stern look of justice. Put it simply, Ren Baqian said. Based on her crime, she will probably be sentenced to imprisonment of more than 10 years, Yang Sin said concisely. Oh. Ren Baqian looked pensive. Mr. Ren, what do you think? Yang Sin saw Ren Baqian's expression and asked directly. He had long realized that it was better to ask directly than to beat around the bush. Most of the time, Ren Baqian would answer directly. Nothing. Ren Baqian shook his head. Although he felt that the legal sentence was a little lenient, according to his opinion, it was a good choice to use her to grow flowers. However, this was Earth, and the country was governed by law. It wasn't like Deo, where apart from the basic laws, the country was governed by individual will. She was just an insignificant person, and he could deal with her however he wanted. Whether it was to use her to grow flowers or to sentence her to death, he didn't care even if she was released. This was because she was really like an ant in his eyes and couldn't even bite him. He didn't think that she had anything important in her hands. Even if she did, it was only because she felt that it was important. The information wasn't equal, and it was easy for her to have this kind of misconception. That's it then. You can deal with her however you want. Ren Baqian stood up. He knew the purpose of the other party telling him this and had also expressed his attitude. Since she was insignificant, it was better to let the law deal with her. On the way back, Ren Wanyan asked curiously, "Brother, did Director Yang look for you?" "It's a small matter," Ren Baqian said faintly. There was no need to tell Ren Wanyan about this. However, he would find out sooner or later. This was also the content of that lesson. Lin Chaola, the team is about to return to Lan City. Are you coming back with me? Ren Baqian kicked Lin Chaola's butt to wake her up. At the same time, he used his face to catch her nine white bone claw. I'm not going back. Lin Chaola hid in the window and looked like she was ready to run away. These days, she had been having so much fun on Earth that she didn't want to think about it. After all, she would go back to sleep every day, and she had so many friends here. Meals aren't provided here. Ren Baqin scowled and tried to scare her. Lin Chaola glared at him angrily. It was as if she was hiding something in her cheeks. She said in a powerful voice, Lin Chaola, will not go back even if I starve to death. Ren Baqin took out a bag, opened it, and grabbed a handful of white rabbit creamy candies. His palm was full of them, and they fell back into the bag. Do you want to go back? If we go back, this bag is all yours. Ren Baqin felt like a demon tempting mortals. To put it more accurately, he was a goldfish. Chapter 8-10. Inside a detention center. Zhou Qingyun was sitting in a separate room, her mind filled with images of the past. A month ago, she was stopped when she tried to leave the country. She knew then that she was doomed. She had been afraid and regretful for the past month. Finally, she could only imagine the unfortunate looks of those people after the news was spread. This imagination gave her inner strength. The footsteps of the prison guards stopped in front of the iron gate. Then, a woman looked into the room and said, Zhou Qingyun, someone wants to see you. Zhou Qingyun was stunned. It had been a month, and no one had come to see her. If her family knew that she was here, they would definitely come to see her. There was only one possibility left. Her family had been stopped and couldn't see her. She knew what crime she had committed. The first time, she was still lucky, but the second time, she didn't believe that anyone would forgive her. Until she saw that man in the meeting room. He was thinner than before, his beard was longer, and he looked more haggard. Such a thought flashed through her mind, and then she suppressed it at the bottom of her heart. A cold expression appeared on her face. You want to see what I have become? Now, your wish has been fulfilled. Ren Wanyan looked at Zhou Qingyun. So much time had passed, but he still couldn't let go. Maybe I'm a person who can't let go, Ren Wanyan thought self-deprecatingly. He knew that Zhou Qingyun was here a week ago, but he had been numbing himself with work until today. He didn't know why he was here. Looking at Zhou Qingyun, although he couldn't bear it, he knew that there was nothing he could do now. No one would forgive her. Why did you do this? I let you off previously. As long as you knew your place and behaved yourself, wouldn't it be better to be like before? Ren Wanyan asked the doubt in his heart. Could it be that she really hated him that much? However, Ren Wanyan couldn't figure out why she hated him so much. If what Zhou Qingyun said was true, why did she hate him so much? He wanted to know why. Zhou Qingyun was silent for a while and lowered her head. Why? He. Without Ren Wanyan, she wouldn't have been able to access the martial arts of the military and the police system. The stain on her body also limited her access to martial arts. She could only be an ordinary person for the rest of her life. But now, there was no need for high intelligence. Even ordinary people knew the meaning of these cultivation techniques. Today, there was an internet celebrity who often shared his experiences in martial arts on the internet. He already had the strength of 500 kilograms. 2 years ago, he was just an ordinary person with the strength of 100 kilograms. Although most people couldn't reach his level, they were still much stronger than before. It had only been 2 years, and it was already like this. What about 10 or 20 years later? The world was about to change. Who would be willing to be an ordinary person at such a time? Furthermore, she also guessed that Rinpoche would be the first to know about these martial arts. It could be seen from the people around him. Under such circumstances, she was not willing to become an ordinary person no matter what. However, with such a stain on her, there was nothing she could do in the country. She could only look for another direction. For example, from the United States, who had obtained the information. After all, this information flowed from his own hands to their hands. Perhaps he could even enter their intelligence department? In that case, the possibility of obtaining a cultivation technique would be even greater. Although China is the world's second largest economy and can overtake Citigroup anytime, Citigroup still has an advantage in terms of technology. Zhou Qingyun believed that as long as they obtained more information, they would definitely be able to come up with a cultivation technique. Therefore, she could only choose this way. She wasn't wrong. After a while, Zhou Qingyun raised her head and said with a cold expression, "Why?" "Because I hate you and want to see you suffer. As long as you suffer, my goal will be achieved." Ren Baqian is also a wanted criminal in the United States. "I have also given away your information and secrets, and I will see you suffer." Ren Wanyan looked at the malicious woman in prison uniform behind the glass and found it hard to believe that this was the person he had been with for 7 years. He sighed and said, "I don't know what secrets you have given away. In fact, we don't have many secrets that can't be seen." "Is that so?" Zhou Qingyun sneered. Not to mention, the fact that Ren Baqian was a wanted criminal in the United States was enough to make them suffer. A few years ago, Ren Baqian had bodyguards who practiced martial arts and owned a piece of land in Wuji City. It would be a joke to say that he didn't have any secrets. "There is an encrypted folder in the computer that you always carry with you and never let me look at. Your secrets are probably hidden there. Although I can't crack it, do you think that the people in the United States can't?" Zhou Qingyun didn't hide it anymore. Anyway, the information had been given away, and she had fallen into this situation. There was no need to hide it anymore. She wanted to see the other party's shocked, flustered, hateful, angry, and cursing look. This made her feel a little happy. More than 300 gigabytes of information. You really have a lot of secrets. Zhou Qingyun sneered happily. Zhou Qingyun's gaze was fixed on Ren Wanyan's face, and as she expected, she saw the shock on his face. However, it was only shock. The expected panic, hatred, and anger didn't appear. This made her feel a little uncomfortable, as if she had punched the air with all her might, and her heart felt empty. What followed was anger. "How is it? I sold all of your information just to see you suffer. You hid it from me for so long, but you didn't expect to end up like this, did you? How is it? Do you regret letting me go last time? If you had killed me last time, maybe these things would have disappeared forever." Ren Wanyan looked at Zhou Qingyun, who suddenly flew into a rage and looked at him with a provocative expression after she finished speaking. He let out a long sigh. The last thing left in his heart had been personally erased by her. "I don't regret it." Ren Wanyan shook his head. His expression was calm but a little strange. Upon hearing his words, Zhou Qingyun became angry again. "Ridiculous. I have never seen someone as ridiculous as you." "I don't regret it," Ren Wanyan said again. He leaned his body against the back of the chair and changed to a more relaxed and comfortable position. "I let you go, and I also received redemption, from my heart. As for your secret information, I really didn't expect it." Ren Wanyan's expression became very conflicted. "You carry that computer with you every day and never let me touch it. You even hid the folder and encrypted it. You didn't expect me to have the chance to copy it, did you?" Zhou Qingyun seemed to have succeeded in her revenge. Waves of pleasure surged from the bottom of her heart and stimulated her brain. "Yes. You copied more than 300 gigabytes of my collection." Ren Wanyan leaned against the back of the chair and continued to sigh. Zhou Qingyun couldn't react. Even if a man has a girlfriend, he will still watch adult films, Ren Wanyan said with a strange expression. That folder is full of adult films. Impossible, that's impossible. You hid it so well. You lied to me. You lied to me. Zhou Qingyun reacted to the content of Ren Wanyan's words and went crazy. That's why I hid it well. If you found out, where would I put my face? Ren Wanyan said faintly. I just didn't expect you to treat it as secret information. Not only did you land yourself in prison, but you also tricked an intelligence line in the United States. He wondered how they would feel if they knew that they were tricked by more than 300 gigabytes of adult films. Chapter 8:11. Luoxia Manor in the Yun Nation was located at the foot of Luoxia Mountain and next to Luoxia Lake. It covered an area of 100 acres. The manor master, Lu Ruffing, was generous and generous. He helped the needy and made friends all over the country. He was also an earth will expert and was quite famous in the Yun Nation. At night, a storm struck and enveloped the entire manor. It was dark inside the manor while the wind howled outside. From time to time, trees were uprooted and crashed into the manor. A few rays of sword light flashed through the night and crashed into the trees in the manor. They flew in the air and hit the manor. A few disciples sheathed their swords and retreated behind the wall against the fierce wind. Here, the wind was slightly weaker. If there was no shelter, the wind could blow people away. There hasn't been such a strong wind in several years, one of the disciples muttered. Another disciple was full of resentment. Those barbarians have angered the gods. They won't have a good ending. The disciple who spoke earlier was silent. It was hard to say how the wind would affect the barbarians, but the crops would probably be destroyed. It was unknown how many people would become homeless this year. In a room in the manor, 3 men sat around a table. The wind was howling outside, and the candlelight in the room was flickering, just like the current situation in the Yun Nation. One of the men was in his 40s. He had smooth skin and a wisp of beard on his chin. He looked worried. This man was Lu Ruffing. Of the other 2, one was in his 40s. He was tall and was called Su Ping. The other was in his 60s. He had a sage-like appearance and was called Gao Shan. Su Ping slammed the table and said, "That bunch of cowards, Su Hu." Their words sounded better than anyone else's, but they were scared out of their wits by the barbarians and ran away. Lu Ruffing sighed and shook his head. Those barbarians are too strong. Even the weakest among them is at the man-will level, and they are considered the backbone of an ordinary sect. Only 1 in 100 ordinary people can reach this level. However, in the barbarian army, they are only the most ordinary soldiers. The heavens are unfair. Why do they love them so much? Shanin, Zbi, Songyang, and Shuguan only have 500 barbarian soldiers in each city. However, as soon as they found traces of the volunteer army, they were immediately wiped out. Tens of thousands of people died in their hands, and countless civilians were implicated. Now that the Yun Nation is in a precarious situation, I don't know if we can clear the dark clouds. Su Ping's face was full of sorrow. Where's the Yun Nation? Hundreds of cities had either surrendered or perished. Jin Shang had been captured, Xing Xingmian had self-immolated, and many of the sects that had tried to assassinate the surrendered city lords had been annihilated. Those aristocratic families, wealthy merchants, and those with integrity who are unwilling to submit to the barbarians have all fled to Great Xia. Only we, the rats in the sewers, are left to drag out an ignoble existence. Lu Ruffing remained silent. How could they not know that the Yun Nation had fallen? He just didn't dare to think about it. He didn't want to think about it. It's impossible to fight those barbarians head-on. The difference in strength is too great, Gao Shan said. Are we going to be like those city lords who surrendered? Su Ping glared at Gao Shan. Are you going to let the barbarians do whatever they want? Don't be impatient, let me finish. Gao Weishan didn't care about his attitude at all. As he pondered, he said, now, there are 100,000 barbarian soldiers in the Yun nation. Zi Donglai divided the Yun nation into 5 districts. Each district has 15,000 soldiers, and each city has 500 soldiers. The remaining 10,000 soldiers are divided into 4 armies to destroy the revolutionary armies and sects that have the intention of resisting. This means that there are a total of 20 armies with 2,500 barbarian soldiers active in the Yun nation. In each barbarian army, there are about 100 earth will experts, and the rest are at the man will level. They are even stronger than ordinary man will experts. Previously, when the Yun nation fought with the barbarian soldiers, we needed at least 10 times the number of soldiers to contend with them. Now, the revolutionary armies are made up of ordinary people who haven't undergone much training, and there are only a few experts among them. Under such circumstances, we have no chance of defeating any of the barbarian armies. No matter where the uprising is, it will be extinguished by them in an instant. Not to mention, the barbarian army still has the soldiers of the warlords who surrendered, and we have spies among them. There are indeed spies. Speaking of spies, Su Ping's face was full of anger. It was the spies sent by the warlords who caused the barbarians to find out about the troops of Shanin City. If it weren't for them, how could the Yun nation have fallen? Gao Weishan shook his head slightly. In fact, he had noticed something. It wasn't just the spies of the warlords who were active. There seemed to be another group of people in the Yun nation who had leaked information to the barbarians. However, there were many experts among them, and he had lost track of them several times and was almost surrounded and killed. Therefore, it's impossible to fight them head-on. When General Zhu Wuchang was still around, he was defeated by the barbarian army, let alone us. It's all because of that traitor, Xing Qingmian, who is always holding us back. He got off lightly by self-immolating. He should have been dismembered. Su Ping cursed again. Lu Ruffing looked at Su Ping helplessly. This guy was good at everything, but he was too irritable and impulsive. Let's hear Brother Gao out first. Then, he looked at Gao Weishan and asked, Brother Gao, what do you think? Gao Weishan stroked his beard and replied, if the hard way doesn't work, then we will use other means. Please enlighten me, Brother Gao. Lu Ruffing said. My sect has an antique that was left behind by the Great Qin, the previous dynasty of Great Xia. Back then, a Daoist priest presented this to the Emperor of Great Qin, claiming that it could stabilize the fate of the country for 10,000 years. However, the Great Qin dynasty suffered from natural disasters such as floods, droughts, and overturning of the earth. For 3 years in a row, the people had no way to live. Then, there were uprisings everywhere, and the Great Qin dynasty fell 2 years later. When Great Xia was established, the original palace was razed to the ground and a new capital was chosen. Lu Rufing's eyes lit up. Although this is a legend and there are many untruths, since Brother Gao mentioned it, there must be something that we don't know about. If someone else had said this, he would have treated it as a joke. However, Gao Weishan, who was in front of him, had many strange techniques that he had seen many times. If he said that there was such a thing, then there was probably a story behind it. That Daoist priest was the founder of my sect. Gao Weishan said with a smile. Lu Ruffing and Su Ping were shocked as they didn't expect that to be the case. At the end of the Great Qin dynasty, the officials were corrupt, and the people had no food and clothing. My sect founder's family was ruined because of those corrupt officials. Later, he obtained this antique by chance and had an idea to present it to the emperor of the Great Qin dynasty. Originally, the Great Qin dynasty still had decades of luck, but after obtaining this antique, it fell in just a few years. That antique is that powerful? Su Ping asked in disbelief. Chapter 8:12. Upon hearing this, the other two people pondered. The history of the ancient times had indeed been cut off. Occasionally, there would be magical weapons or martial arts left behind from the ancient times. Only then would people know that the experts of the ancient times were incomparable to the current practitioners. There were countless rare treasures and powerful martial arts. Many supernatural novels were based on people's guesses about the history of the ancient times. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, there wasn't much information about the ancient times. Occasionally, there would be some gains in some ancient tombs or other places that were rarely visited by humans. However, from those martial arts, it was known that there were written inheritances in the ancient times. Therefore, many people suspected that there was a great change that cut off the history. Unfortunately, people nowadays could only guess. However, it was a fact that antiques from the ancient times often had extremely powerful effects. Who's going to do this? Lon City is full of hidden talents, and Qi Zixiao is a world-class expert. Even a spirit will expert might not be able to deliver this to the Dayo Palace. Besides, this antique can't just be placed in any random place, right? Lu Ruofeng muttered. Qi Zixiao is getting married in a few months, and some of the warlords of the Yun nation will take this opportunity to go to Lon City to meet her. I can take this opportunity to sneak in and find a chance to present this antique to her. If they are exposed, they will be exterminated. Do they have the guts to do so? Lu Ruofeng asked. I have helped the warlord of Suncreed City before, and he doesn't know my identity. If I suggest going with him, it should be possible. Gao Yishan stroked his beard and laughed. Lu Ruofeng looked at Gao Yishan with admiration. In any case, the risk of going deep into the tiger's den wasn't small. If they were discovered, they would definitely die. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard other sounds mixed with the wind. The three of them listened carefully, and their expressions changed. It's barbarian soldiers. Why are they here in such windy weather? Lu Ruofeng got up and moved the mechanism in the corner of the room, revealing a secret passage. Both of you, leave this place quickly. Brother Lu, you. Song Ping stood in front of the secret passage and saw that Lu Ruofeng had no intention of leaving. My whole family is here, and I'm afraid we won't be able to escape. I can't let them be lonely on the road. Lu Ruofeng smiled. Forgive me for being selfish, but whether the Yun nation can be revived in the future depends on all of you. Su Ping and Gao Yishan's eyes were bloodshot, and a surge of blood qi surged in their chests. 10 minutes ago, a team of several hundred people was hiding under a hill. Everyone was trying their best to stick close to the ground to stabilize themselves. If he stood up straight, he would probably be blown away by the wind. Damn, the wind in the Yun nation is really strong, a burly man in leather armor cursed. He had never seen such a strong wind in Dayo. How did the people in this place live? However, as soon as the words left his mouth, they were blown away by the wind. The sound was barely audible. The Luoxia Manor is just ahead. I originally wanted to settle things tonight, but I didn't expect the wind to be so strong. Even the trees were blown away. There's no way to go. Looks like we'll have to wait for the wind to stop before we can move, another burly man yelled. I feel like if I jump, I'll be blown away by the wind, a big man shouted against the wind. Pfft, we won't look for you. Another big man laughed. The Luoxia Manor is right in front of us, and the wind is blowing from behind. If we jump, do you think we'll be blown into the Luoxia Manor? When we fall from the sky, we'll definitely give them a fright, a big man said eagerly. Good idea. I'm just afraid that we'll be blown away. The others laughed. I'll give it a try. If we get blown away, I'll come back to look for you. The burly man couldn't hold back his thoughts. It would be great if he could be blown away by the wind and fly in it. I'm just afraid that we'll fall to our deaths if we blow too high, someone else shouted. didn't you see those trees? They're all blown away, and they're only a few meters high at most. Even if we fly more than 30 meters high, we won't fall to our deaths." The burly man laughed. He was obviously confident in himself. After hearing what he said, many people were tempted. Although they were in the army, this was the Aboriginal army. Every soldier was very strong, and the discipline was naturally much worse than that of other nations. Although they were doing a mission outside, the group of people was affected by what the burly man said. They threw the mission aside and began to seriously discuss the feasibility of flying with the wind to Luoxia Manor. "I'll give it a try first." The burly man who first suggested this idea laughed at the crowd. Without waiting for the others to stop him, he immediately got up. The strong wind immediately made him lose his balance. However, he wasn't worried at all. He laughed loudly and kicked off the ground. His whole body jumped forward as if he had blended into the wind. As the strong wind blew further and further away, they could vaguely hear his carefree laughter coming from the opposite direction of the wind. The others immediately felt an itch in their hearts. What if he falls into the Luoxia Manor? He's not a match for us alone. I'll go and help him. Another burly man grabbed his knife, got up, and also disappeared into the wind. "I'll go too. I'll go too." Dozens of figures disappeared into the wind. It was unknown whether they went to look for him or if they found it interesting to be blown away by the wind. The latter was more likely to be the case. "You guys wait here. I'll go and take a look as well. They won't be able to stop the Luoxia Manor's village chief." One of the officers stood up and also disappeared into the wind. Feeling his body being pushed by the strong wind, as if he had blended into the wind, the officer also laughed heartily. He deeply felt that it was fortunate that he had followed along. It was much more interesting than waiting there for the mission to start. Seeing his figure disappear, even more people became restless. Another officer lay on the ground and shouted to the surroundings, "Stay where you are. Don't copy them." Who knew if they would fall into the Luoxia Manor? Although it looked fun. If too many people copied them, they would be blown too far away by the wind. When the time came, they would inevitably be whipped for delaying the mission. Lu Ruofing sent the two of them off through the secret passage. Then, he picked up the treasure sword hanging on the wall and sat there, waiting for the Aboriginals to attack. He stroked the scabbard with his fingers and thought to himself, "Old friend, this is the last time." However, after 30 seconds, he seemed to hear the shouts of dozens of Aboriginals. It was a little strange. Those people's voices seemed to be coming from above. With such strong wind, how could these people's voices be coming from above? 1 minute passed. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed. The expected Aboriginals still hadn't attacked. This caused his expression to start to fluctuate. The disciples in the other rooms and behind the walls in the courtyard all had suspicious looks on their faces. Who was the one who made that sound just now? Could it be the god that controlled the wind? When they thought about it, it was really possible. Otherwise, why would the wind above their heads transmit their voices? The more they thought about it, the more they felt it was possible. Many people imagined the god that controlled the wind riding on the wind, being surrounded by the wind, inviting friends to a banquet and exchanging cups of wine. Many people started to pray silently. This continued until daybreak. The sound of the wind gradually stopped. An Aboriginal army charged over from afar, and the manor was engulfed in blood and fire. Further away, the Aboriginals were blown to the ground by the wind, crashing into a forest or a pile of rocks. They shook their heads, got up, and looked around blankly. Damn it, where did they fly to? Chapter 8:13. In this dark space, one couldn't tell up from down, left from right, far from near, and couldn't see the boundaries. There wasn't even a concept of time. However, a fireball was suspended there at this time, emitting light and making the space more lively. In addition, there were a few masses of gas moving around the fireball. The gas itself was also changing and seemed to be shrinking inward. Renbochin observed this space for a moment and knew that it would take some time for the other planets to form. This was Renbochin's Sea of Knowledge. On that day, Renbochin shrank everything in his Sea of Knowledge into a singularity. After the explosion, countless invisible cosmic dust was ejected into the entire Sea of Knowledge. Renbochin didn't know whether it was cosmic dust or something in his Sea of Knowledge. He didn't even know whether it was material or divine sense. However, this was in the Sea of Knowledge, and Renbochin felt that it was more likely to be divine sense. Subsequently, those invisible particles began to move, collide, and fuse, gradually forming a nebula. After a few days, the movement and collision of those materials gradually began to change this nebula. The appearance of a few gravitational points caused everything in the nebula to move closer in several directions. Some of them transformed into this fireball, or rather, stars. Other gases also formed a few masses of gas. According to Renbochin's observation, the other few masses of gas were forming planets. This filled Renbochin with amazement. After all, the experience of creating a universe in one Sea of Knowledge and observing how it was formed was too novel. He didn't know if the real universe was formed in this way. However, Renbochin felt that the possibility was very high. At least from the eruption of the singularity to the formation of the planets, there didn't seem to be any problems. What he wanted to know now was what this universe in his Sea of Knowledge could bring him. It couldn't be that it would just erupt for nothing, right? It seemed like he had to wait for those planets to form before slowly exploring it. Renbochin withdrew his divine sense from his Sea of Knowledge and opened his eyes. He could already see the towering city walls on the distant horizon. Lawn City. I'm finally back. Renbochin sighed softly and turned to look around. When he left, there were less than 1,000 people, but when he returned, there were nearly 3,000. More than 2,000 of them were new winged cavalry warriors. However, the original winged cavalry warriors were reduced by 200 after the trip to the 60,000 mountains. It had to be said that this was an extremely risky job. It had only been a short span of 3 years, from 1,500 to only 400 people had died. He didn't know if it was because he was too unlucky, or they were too unlucky, but it seemed that ever since he came, they had died very quickly. One had to know that from the Empress's ascension to the throne until Renbochin's arrival, the winged cavalry had suffered very few casualties in the past 7 years. Then, he went with the flow, unable to bear to look back, recalling the glorious years of the past. At the thought of this, Renbochin sighed. It seemed that it was all the Bichi's fault since the first time he saw it. Sometimes, it was a natural disaster, but more often, it was a man-made disaster. One thing after another, it was very strange. Fortunately, he hadn't seen it since coming out of the 60,000 mountains. He didn't know where it had gone. If it was possible, it would be best if they never met again. At the thought of this, he shook his head and chased that little fellow out of his mind. He rode on the Crow General and followed behind the Empress. On this trip, he had brought back the Crow General and the Roaring Emperor. He was prepared to bring the Roaring Emperor to the imperial court if anyone quarreled with him in the future. He would definitely give those big shots a big surprise. After walking for another 2 hours, they finally saw the city gate clearly and saw a group of people waiting outside. When the people outside the city gate saw the return of the Empress's entourage, their tensed faces finally relaxed a little. Her Majesty had been out for too long this time. She had been gone for more than a year. However, when the entourage got closer, everyone tensed up again and looked serious. When the entourage stopped and split into 2 sides, the Empress's imperial chariot arrived at the front. Everyone stepped forward and greeted, "We welcome your majesty." Hong Wuan lifted the curtain and revealed the Empress, who was lying inside. She glanced at the people outside, sat up, and said faintly, "Thank you for your hard work during this period. Let's go back to the palace first." "Yes. When we enter the city later, be shorter," Ren Baqin said as he patted the Crow General's back. The Crow General was a little tall. Its head was 4 meters tall, and its back was more than 2 meters tall. When it sat on its back, it was much taller than the Empress who was in the imperial chariot. It was fine when they were outside, and no one cared about this. However, when they entered the city, Ren Baqin felt that it was better to keep a low profile. Low profile equals shorter. The Crow General twisted its head and was dumbfounded. "Why am I shorter?" "For example, walk while squatting," Ren Baqin suggested. The Crow General was confused when it heard this. "I'm already happy enough that I'm your mount, but I still have to squat while walking. Isn't it too much to ask a bird to squat while walking? I don't have such a function." The process of entering the city attracted many onlookers. The Aboriginals were even more interested in watching a show than the Chinese. Moreover, the Empress had been gone for a year. She had never been away for so long before. The longest she had been away was when she went to Tianjin Basin, went to the north to fight Great Xia, and then went to Great Xia with Ren Baqin. Thinking about it, it seemed that all of these times had something to do with Ren Baqin. Many people inexplicably thought of this and looked at Ren Baqin with a strange gaze. It was as if Ren Baqin had abducted the Empress. Of course, this seemed to be the case. However, it wasn't only Ren Baqin who attracted everyone's attention, but also the big bird that he was riding on. Everyone could feel the oppressive aura coming from the giant bird, as if it was facing the ministers of the imperial court. This made many people's faces change. Was the bird that Ren Baqin was riding on only a cardinal heaven-level beast? In Lan City, apart from the Empress's Qi Shui, the only other beast of this level was the big bird that Ren Baqin was riding on. The only thing that puzzled everyone was that the big bird had shrunk its neck and lowered its body. A cardinal heaven-level beast was walking like an old hen. The Crow General had a backpack on its back that contained the Roaring Emperor. It was poking its head out to look around. The Roaring Emperor was very close to people, so it wasn't afraid to see so many people. Its eyes were full of curiosity as it wondered if it should roar to make its presence known. Before it could figure it out, Ren Baqin's big hand descended from the sky and pressed it into the backpack. After entering the palace, the Empress used the excuse that she was tired from the long journey and that she would talk about it in court the next day. She then turned around and returned to her quarters. The others had no choice but to suppress their thoughts and disperse. Ren Baqin returned to Pingle Park and found Tian Tian and Gun Gun, the two pandas that were taller than a person when they stood up. He rubbed their faces flat and played a slap game with them. Tian Tian slapped Ren Baqin, but Ren Baqin dodged it and slapped Tian Tian away. Gun Gun did the same thing. After a while, the two pandas looked at Ren Baqin with grievances on their faces, and tears were about to fall. The golden retriever, a baby listening cat, was convulsing with laughter. Then, it jumped onto Ren Baqin's shoulder with a peach in its hands and handed it to him. It looked at him anxiously with its pair of small eyes, afraid that he would really take away the peach that was covered in monkey paw prints and saliva. This fellow! Ren Baqin shook the golden retriever off his head in disgust. This fellow was always very good at causing trouble, but it was a pity that it was dishonest and slippery. Chapter 8:14. Ren Baqin went to the academy early the next morning. After being away for so long, he somewhat missed those idiots. After being away for a year, there had been some changes to the academy. After all, with the radio station, many things could be remotely controlled and transmitted back to the academy. The academy would change according to his wishes. Things like language would change completely after passing through the mouths of two people. Renbochin already knew that it was somewhat different from what he had imagined, but it was better than not moving at all. After entering the school, he saw that the first row was still the same classrooms and his office. The second row was a row of new buildings, including new classrooms and chemistry laboratories, and the library in the corner behind it. Not much had changed. Other than that, there were so many changes that he almost couldn't recognize them. First of all, the purple bamboo forest around the pond in the backyard was gone and replaced by a cement floor. It seemed that the Ministry of Works, which had nothing better to do, had used cement to resurface the ground of the school. On the ground, there was a huge hot air balloon. It wasn't made by the students of the academy, but by the egg-kicking maniac, Li Fu. Ever since he rode in the hot air balloon, he had great expectations for this thing. Unfortunately, Renbochin didn't do it again. After being away for a year, Li Fu simply grabbed a few students to be his assistants and began to study the hot air balloon. The students of the academy naturally didn't dare to refuse this egg-kicking maniac. After all, no one could beat him. It was useless to call their parents over, and it was very likely that they would get kicked. Li Fu's godly legs were very famous in Lan City. The result of their work was the one in front of Renbochin. The words "I am a Gua Pai" were written in simplified Chinese on it in big, bloody letters. Those kids were bullying Li Fu because he didn't understand simplified Chinese. Renbochin had always encouraged this method of applying what one had learned and using one's brain to trick the enemy. However, he heard that a few days later, those kids got kicked and had to stay at home for a few days with their legs between their legs. Other than this place, the courtyard walls could no longer be seen. The original location of the courtyard walls was now a tall building like a factory, but the area was much smaller. In fact, this was the academy's craftsman shop. The blacksmith shop, the carpenter shop, the blast furnace, the warehouse, and the assembly room were all located there. From the very beginning, Renbochin hoped that the students would be able to quickly master what they had learned through a combination of learning and application, thereby reducing their own burden. Therefore, after the last steam train, the craftsmen did not leave. Instead, they stayed in the academy. The students of the academy would research and propose ideas, and the craftsmen would help them turn their ideas into reality. Further away from the courtyard was a thermal power plant. It did not produce much electricity and could only supply the entire academy and the palace. Renbochin went to the power plant to take a look. There were piles of coal everywhere outside, and the equipment in the power plant had been upgraded to a new generation. Compared to the previous generation, the conversion efficiency was much higher. There were pipes, gears, and thick rivets everywhere. It was full of a steampunk style. It seemed that the Aboriginals liked this simple and crude style that was full of power and beauty. These things were created and tested by the students in the academy during their spare time. Renbochin was very satisfied with their ability to take action. Although these guys were a little stupid, their actions were really good. They didn't slack off and were very motivated. In addition to these things, they also created electric wires under Renbochin's remote guidance. This was something that didn't require much technology. The important thing was the rubber coating on the outside of the electric wires. They also designed a small factory that could produce thousands of meters of finished electric wires every day. There was also the possibility of further increasing the output. The only limitation was the transportation of rubber. In any case, this was very useful. This factory was built 3 months ago and had accumulated 100,000 meters of electric wires. Together with the power plant, it could at least keep most parts of Lan City dark at night. This was also something that Renbochin planned to do immediately after his return. Before his wedding with the Empress, he wanted to turn Lan City into a city that never slept. After touring the power plant, Renbochin went straight back to the front courtyard. There were already students coming in one after another. After seeing him, their eyes lit up. Principal is back. In fact, they already knew yesterday and saw the guards just now. However, when they saw Renbachien, their spirits were lifted. Although the academy could still carry out teaching after Renbachien left, the progress was much slower. Mainly, the first year would be taught by robots, and the second year would be taught by senior sisters and robots together. Renbachien nodded with a serious face. As the principal of an academy, he had to have the imposing manner of a principal. Yagüe is actually here. The next voice made Renbachien's eyes widen. He already knew that they were scolding him behind his back. However, to shout in front of him, they must be itching for a beating, right? He looked up and saw that it was indeed the little girl, Tong Lan. She seemed to be a little taller, but she was still the shortest. She had a delicate little face with baby fat, was dressed in white, and was looking up with her nostrils pointing to the sky. Renbachien smiled at her, revealing his white teeth. Now that he had mastered his martial arts, it was time for her to be beaten up. Little girl. Have you finished your homework? Tong Lan's face immediately turned black when she heard this. Ah! 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 She looked up to the sky and screamed 3 times, looking like a roaring emperor. Then, she quickly ran back to the classroom to continue doing her homework. Soon after, students arrived one after another. Not only were there familiar students, but there were also some unfamiliar students who were recruited this year. Although Renbachien was still wandering around the 60,000 mountains with the Empress, he didn't stop recruiting students and was still led by the older students. After all, the things for the first years were simple. With the older students, robots, and teaching materials, there wasn't much of a problem in teaching. Furthermore, many of the older students liked to be teachers, and even the little girl Tong Lan would occasionally make a cameo appearance. Of course, this batch of first years used the teaching materials previously used by the older students. However, with Renbachien's return, they could also use the new teaching materials. The new students looked curiously at Renbachien, the husband of the Empress and the principal of this academy. This academy was built by him single-handedly. They didn't expect to see him for the first time after such a long time. What made them puzzled was that wasn't he supposed to be a gigolo? Why did he look even fiercer than the adults at home? However, this kind of appearance was in line with the Aboriginals' aesthetic standards. Whether it was the lack of eyebrows or beard, the bald appearance, or the 150 kilograms of body, they all had a favorable impression of him. Renbachien could see the clock tower in the distance when he looked up. When it was time, he asked someone to close the door and went to the classroom for the third years. Everyone was quite excited to see Renbachien. However, when Renbachien opened his mouth, everyone's faces fell. Renbachien stood behind the lectern, knocked on it, and asked, "Have you all finished your homework?" Then, he looked at everyone's frown or bitter expression and said, "It doesn't matter if you haven't finished your homework." Everyone was shocked. When did Yagüe become so kind? After all, I'm not a devil. Renbachien laughed. Those who haven't finished your homework, hang it on the flagpole after school and practice for 5 minutes. Then, go home and continue to do your homework. At the same time, you have to write a 10-point test paper. After hearing Renbachien's words, everyone was no longer happy to see him. All of them stared at him fiercely. You call this not a devil? Chapter 8:15. While Renbachien was at the academy, the Empress was listening to the reports from the ministers in the court. The Yun nation was now completely occupied. Although there were still some rebels and rats lurking in the dark, the overall situation had been stabilized with the help of the warlords. Zi Donglai had done a good job. Of course, this was also achieved at the cost of a large number of lives. From the beginning, he showed his ruthless methods and killed batch after batch of warlords, officials, and sects who resisted. In the early stages, every city that he passed through brought a strong smell of blood. However, as time went on, there were fewer and fewer people who resisted, especially after that batch of warlords surrendered. The Yun nation was quickly destroyed. For a period of time after that, there were people everywhere who wanted to resist after the destruction of the country. In the face of great power, some people were powerless even if they had the heart to do so. After killing a few batches, the number of people who resisted gradually decreased. Moreover, the Empress had been controlling the situation in the Protectorate of the Northeast and didn't specialize in plundering like before. Although it couldn't be said that she didn't do anything dangerous, the impact wasn't too great. As long as they behaved themselves and didn't do anything dangerous, they didn't have to worry about someone rushing into their homes with a knife. In fact, they rarely saw the Aboriginals. The cities were still managed by the people of the Yun nation, but they were under the supervision of the Aboriginals. In fact, many cities didn't even have a change of warlords. There were only 500 burly Aboriginal soldiers in the cities who had the word violence written all over their bodies. However, this had little to do with the Aboriginals. The only people who were truly affected by this disaster were the big shots. As long as they could survive, there weren't many people who wanted to use their thin arms and legs to get close to the Aboriginals. Although there were some ambitious people, after measuring the gap between the two sides, they could only secretly do some small things behind the scenes. However, with the spies sent by the warlords and the embroidered uniform guards from the rearguard commandery who were getting more and more proficient, these people would be wiped out as long as they exposed themselves. In this way, the Aboriginals' occupation of the entire Yun nation was surprisingly smooth. Now, except for a small number of people with lofty ideals who had lost their countries, most of them could behave themselves. The lofty ideals who had lost their countries had to carefully hide under the search of dozens of Aboriginal troops. In addition to the Yun nation, there were also many internal changes in Dayo. The first was the cement road that connected the Yun nation. With the efforts of hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war, more than 500 kilometers had been built. The large increase in the number of prisoners had allowed the project to progress much faster than expected. It was estimated that it would be connected to the border of the Yun nation in another year and a half. Speaking of this, both the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Revenue were full of smiles. As long as this road was repaired, the transportation speed would at least double. When that time came, it would be more convenient to manage the Yun nation and transport materials. In addition, in the past few months, with a steady stream of resources being sent back to Dayo from the Yun nation, there was no longer a shortage of salt. There were also many spoils of war, such as cloth on the market. Apart from this, there were now many more ironware in the market. They were all produced by Mount Damo. After satisfying the needs of the army, they finally began to be distributed among the people. This caused the price of ironware in the market to drop significantly. In addition, high-yield crops such as potatoes and pumpkins have been promoted throughout the territory of Dayo. These high-yield crops, which could be harvested in 3 to 4 months, were already on the dining tables of ordinary people. This greatly reduced the pressure on Dayo's food supply, and they even began to have some food reserves. Although these reserves were only potatoes and pumpkins, which contained far less energy than meat, there was a large quantity. 1 mu of land could produce thousands of kilograms of crops, which were cheap and could be eaten in large quantities. Furthermore, eating meat every day would make one sick. Nowadays, stewed meat with potatoes and pumpkin were not bad. They tasted good and weren't as greasy as eating meat alone. There had been a lot of changes over the past year, involving all aspects. Even though it was just a brief explanation, it took the Empress a lot of time to finish listening to it. She had a smile on her face. Overall, everything was progressing in a good direction. Nothing could make the Empress happier than her own people living a good life. In a good mood, the Empress praised all the officials, which was a rare occurrence. After praising everyone, the Empress was in a good mood and casually said, I saw my brother when I went back this time." Everyone was stunned and didn't know why the Empress suddenly mentioned cheese eating. They looked at each other and didn't know how to respond. "He's doing well. I invited him back to Lawn City, but he rejected," the Empress continued. This time, everyone was even more afraid to speak. "You don't have to be so cautious. Now, my brother has found a new target." The Empress smiled and looked around the hall. She glanced at Ko Zhihai and then retracted her gaze. This junior elder, who had always felt that cheese eating was more suitable for the throne, had been very well behaved recently. Although the Empress didn't like him very much, she kept him in the imperial court because of his ability. However, after seeing her brother this time, she had seen through many things and didn't remember Ko Zhihai's petty thoughts anymore. "My brother is very interested in the foreign races in the depths of the 60,000 mountains and is currently searching for their whereabouts." Upon hearing this, everyone immediately perked up and looked at the Empress, wanting to know more about the situation of the foreign races. Previously, when the Empress transferred Shiwanya away, she had mentioned this, but everyone didn't know the specific situation and was now waiting for the Empress to explain. "I didn't expect there to be so many foreign races in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. I also didn't expect us to come from the other side of the 60,000 mountains. At the same time, I finally guessed the whereabouts of the late emperor." After the Empress finished speaking, everyone couldn't remain calm. "Your Majesty, what did you find in the mountains this time?" The Empress looked at the people below and smiled. She liked to see them turn pale with fright. Before returning, she had discussed this with Renbaqian. Today was no longer the time when the human race was chased back. Although the strength of the human race was still lower than before, they had found another way. Sooner or later, they would have to return to the other side of the 60,000 mountains to see what it was like. Both the Empress and Renbaqian were full of curiosity about that land. By sharing this information with all the ministers, he could let everyone know where the future lay and let everyone put in all their effort to contribute to the development of Dayo. No matter what they did in the future, as long as it was beneficial to the development of Dayo, there would be fewer obstacles. At the same time, the Empress's establishment of the Barbarian Protectorate and future expansion into the depths of the 60,000 mountains required the support of these officials. In addition, there was another important point, which was the relationship between the Aboriginals and other nations. This would make it easier for these officials to accept the people of other nations. If a ruler treated his officials like his own hands and feet, the officials would treat the ruler like a confidant. If a ruler treated his officials like dogs and horses, the officials would treat the ruler like a fellow countryman. If a ruler treated his officials like dirt, the officials would treat the ruler like an enemy. How the imperial court treated a nation would be reflected back by the nation. Renbaqian hoped to subdue the people who weren't aboriginals as much as possible. After all, population was a very important factor in the field of technology. As the Empress recounted her encounter with the herdsmen and the foreign races, as well as some information that Renbaqian had obtained from the herdsmen, everyone in the imperial court was stunned. The entire court was no longer as noisy as it was in the past, and everyone was speechless with their mouths wide open. In ancient times, the human race was chased here by the other races. Was this the land of exile? In ancient times, the human race was forced to sign an agreement by the foreign races. The Aboriginals and the other nations were part of the human race. The Aboriginals were the protectors to guard against the foreign races on the other side of the 60,000 mountains. With the passage of time, that history disappeared along with the agreement. The human race multiplied and rebuilt their civilization and nations, and the protectors became the so-called barbarians. Today, there were 4 nations with hundreds of millions of people. How many years did it take for the remaining tens of thousands of people to recover? Hearing this, everyone felt as if they were listening to a story. If the Empress wasn't the one saying this, they wouldn't have believed it to be true. It was simply too bizarre. Your Majesty, are you serious? Qin Chuan couldn't help but stare at her and ask. The next second, the Empress's figure flashed, and Qin Chuan flew out of the hole. The Empress returned to her seat and looked at everyone. Her face turned from sunny to gloomy as she asked, "Do you think I'm telling a story?" Everyone shrunk their necks. "We don't dare." However, there was too much information in the Empress's words, and everyone's hearts were in turmoil. Even Qin Chuan, who was kicked out by the Empress, felt the same. Chapter 8:16. When Renbaqian went to the Ministry of Works in the afternoon, he suddenly heard a familiar sound that seemed to draw an arc in the air. Renbaqian was all too familiar with this sound. Whether it was the content or the instrument, it was majestic. It was the arrow. Renbaqian was stunned. In this world, apart from himself, there was only one person who could use this instrument to play this kind of music. He looked toward the source of the sound and saw that it was coming from the open window on the second floor of a restaurant. Before he got close, he heard the sound of cursing coming from the window. "What's this sound? It's too unpleasant." Renbaqian's face darkened. Did they have something to say about my unique skill? In all fairness, this music wasn't unpleasant at all. The jumping notes were like elves and were only slightly inferior to his. To put it bluntly, it was either stupid or bad. Renbaqian didn't go through the main entrance and jumped into the restaurant from the window on the second floor. Thump. The arrow made a staccato sound and stopped abruptly. This was because he had bumped into the person playing the arrow. Renbaqian felt his knee hit something. He looked down and saw that the girl was already lying on the ground. "Even though it's unpleasant, you didn't have to hit her, right?" The people who were condemning the sound just now were now condemning Renbaqian. After all, the girl looked delicate and weak. Being kicked, in the eyes of others, probably wasn't a good feeling. Even though this girl wasn't an Aboriginal, she had seen many Jing tribe people in Lon City over the past 2 years. At this moment, the Aboriginal people burst out with an unexpected sense of justice. "This is too much. Is this the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy?" Someone recognized him. Even the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy can't hit someone, right? Furthermore, he hit a little girl. Renbaqian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This situation couldn't be said to be an accident, right? Did he accidentally kick her when he jumped in? He couldn't say that he did it on purpose. The appearance of the Jing tribe people in Lon City was the result of his hard work. Speaking of which, why was this little girl playing the arrow by the window? The person on the ground was his only disciple, Zhang Kaixian. At this time, she was covering her head with one hand and protecting the arrow with the other. She was looking at Qin Haodong with tears in her eyes. Her tears were about to fall. She bit her lips and held it in for a long time before she called out weakly, "Master." She had been waiting in Lon City for a long time. Previously, she had inquired about his habits in Lon City. Knowing that he had returned, she deliberately waited here. She couldn't get close to the academy, so he often went to the Ministry of Works. She was prepared to wait here for a few days, but she didn't expect to meet him on the first day. Furthermore, she didn't expect that cheap teacher of hers to be so enthusiastic. He even need her. This was an accident. Renbaqian looked embarrassed. He reached out to pull Zhang Kaixian up and rubbed her head as if he was coaxing a child. "Does it still hurt?" "It hurts." Zhang Kaixian couldn't hold it in anymore, and her tears flowed down as soon as she opened her mouth. Renbaqian's head was about to explode. Those who didn't know better would think that he had done something to her. "You're already a big girl, yet you cry at the drop of a hat." Renbaqian pulled a long face. Zhang Kaixian hugged her arrow and sobbed as she said, "You kicked me." Renbaqian turned his head and saw 5 to 6 burly men sitting around the table. They were watching the commotion with great interest. This group of people understood what was said just now. After all, the weakest among them was at the manual level and had sharp ears and eyes. The aboriginals were straightforward, but they weren't deaf. The reunion of teacher and disciple was an accident. Rinpoche cupped his hands. Greetings, Principal Ren. Someone stood up and cupped his hands. Upon seeing this, the others also stood up. After all, he was the husband of the Empress, and they had to show some respect. Especially now that the Black Bamboo Academy had made a name for itself. This group of people didn't have much respect for cultured people. They still respected cultured people who could fight. After all, Rinpoche defeated a Cardinal Heaven expert several times last year and even threw a big bomb at the end, which earned him the respect of this group of men. Rinpoche wasn't in a hurry to go to the Ministry of Works. He pressed Jean Kaisien down on a chair and sized her up while waiting for her to stop crying. This girl had grown up a lot in 2 years. Originally, she was still a little inexperienced, but now, she was as resplendent as a gem. There were many beautiful women, but there weren't many who could maintain their innocence like her, who were clean and untainted by even a speck of dust. If there was one, Rinpoche inexplicably thought of the third most powerful expert in the world, Li Yuanzhu. That female Taoist also gave off a clean vibe, but she was calmer than Jean Kaisien. She was like the sea, transparent but unfathomable. In addition to that clean vibe, Jean Kaisien had an additional gentleness. She was like a delicate flower that needed to be carefully cared for. After carefully sensing her strength, Rinpoche estimated that she was at the manual level. This wasn't enough to protect her all the way to Lon City, so she must have come with someone else. After waiting for 15 minutes, Jean Kaisien finally stopped sobbing. Her face was smeared with patches of mud, making her look like a dirty cat. There was a visible bump on her forehead. Rinpoche asked the guards to apply some black mud cream on her forehead, and it would disappear in a moment. It was just that smearing a patch of black mud cream on her forehead was like sticking a piece of dog skin plaster. Does it still hurt? Rinpoche asked casually when he saw that Jean Kaisien had calmed down. She was a pretty big girl. She should be around 18 years old, right? You're crying and snot just because you hit your head. Although he weighed more than 150 kilograms, coupled with the inertia from jumping up from downstairs, all right, he forgave her. It hurts. Jean Kaisien replied without hesitation. Rinpoche felt that he was being rude. Why did she mention this? Why are you here? This time, Jean Kaisien could finally answer normally. Master, you are getting married. A lot of people want to give you gifts, so I followed them here. Rinpoche was a little surprised. There were actually people who wanted to give him gifts. However, it seemed normal after thinking about it. After all, he was still remotely commanding the rearguard commandery. Furthermore, it was thanks to him that the Jing tribe people were able to survive. It was only right for them to give him gifts. Rinpoche didn't have the intention of being honest and not accepting bribes. This was called affection. However, he was surprised that this cheap disciple of his actually wanted to visit him. Is your mother here? Rinpoche remembered that her father was still catching rats in the Yun Nation. In that case, she could only follow her mother. Unexpectedly, Jean Kaisien shook her head and said, Uncle Zhu accompanied me here. She then explained, he's an uncle from the residence. Now that he's an earth will expert, he can accompany me here. Although my mother wanted to come, she couldn't get away. We came with the convoy of more than 100 people, and we didn't encounter any danger. Have you been here for a long time? Rinpoche asked with a smile. The wedding was originally scheduled for March, but it was already the end of September. Chapter 8:17. Have you been bullied here? Renbochin asked with a smile. Although the Jing tribe was rarely bullied in Lon City, it would still happen sometimes. Fortunately, we live at Jing Street. I heard that you marked out the place for us to live. The people around us are also from Tianjing Basin, so no one bullies us, Zhang Kaixian replied. Renbochin nodded. It seemed that these people went directly to Qingyun's sword after they arrived. After all, it was one of the two remaining spirit wool experts in Tianjing Basin. The other one was in charge of Tianjing Basin, so they naturally had to pay a visit to him first. Renbochin chatted with her for a while and learned about the current situation in Tianjing Basin. Most of it was known from the secret reports from the rearguard commandery, but some was only heard from her. All in all, Tianjing Basin was doing pretty well. At least there were no more wars between the powers, and more than half of the sects had disappeared. The lives of the people were much better now. Seeing that it was almost time, Renbochin got someone to send her to Jing Street. Uncle Zhu is nearby and will accompany me back, Zhang Kaixian immediately said. Renbochin estimated that the person accompanying her wouldn't be too far away. He asked the guards and found that someone was indeed stopped below. However, nothing happened, and the guards didn't report to him. Then pay more attention to your safety, Renbochin said casually. In fact, the public security in Lon City wasn't too bad, even though it seemed very barbaric to outsiders and fights were happening almost all the time on the streets. However, it was usually, "What are you looking at?" or "What's wrong with looking at you?" What happened next was natural. With the Jing tribe paving the way, there shouldn't be any problems as long as these people kept a low profile. At least, Renbochin had never heard of kidnapping women. "Master, you kicked me as soon as we met." Zhang Kaixian looked embarrassed. Renbochin felt a toothache. Why was she talking about this again? "I don't blame you, but can you agree to a small request of mine?" Zhang Kaixian blinked her eyes and looked at him. "What request?" Renbochin raised his eyebrows. "They all say that you are very powerful. You built such a tall clock tower and can tell the time at any time. The palace has also become a city that never sleeps. You even defeated a spirit wool expert. They also say that your school can teach very powerful students. Can I go in and learn from you?" "Of course, I also want to learn new songs from you." Renbochin laughed. This wasn't a big problem. As long as he restrained the little bean sprout Tong Lan and the second year's muscle-brained Zhu Hua, he would be able to win. "You have to ask your mother first. If you want to study at the academy, you have to stay here for a few years." Renbochin rubbed her head. "Thank you, master." Zhang Kaixian immediately beamed with joy. For a moment, the second floor of the restaurant became much brighter. After Renbochin left the restaurant, a middle-aged man hurriedly came upstairs. He was first surprised by the ointment on Zhang Kaixian's forehead. Then, he sat in front of the table, poured himself a cup of water, smiled, and said, "Does Principal Ren still remember you?" Zhang Kaixian said happily, "Of course. After all, I'm his only disciple." "That's good." The middle-aged man's spirits were lifted. Principal Ren even acknowledged the little princess as his disciple, which was a great thing for both the Golden Ring residents and Tianjing Basin. "I want to stay here and learn from Master, but Mother has to agree first." "Mother will agree, right?" Zhang Kaixian rolled her eyes and asked with anticipation. "Did Principal Ren agree?" The middle-aged man asked first. After getting an affirmative answer, he thought for a while and said, "Madam will probably agree, but I have to send her a letter first." "I think so too." Zhang Kaixian smiled until her eyes were squinted. She knew that Master still remembered her. It was great to see him again. Master even agreed to learn from her. After seeing him today, the unhappiness that she felt about the wedding between Master and the ruler of Deo was washed away. Even though she was kicked. When Renbaqian arrived at the Ministry of Works, Tong Zhenye was already waiting for him. When Renbaqian was staying in the restaurant, he had already sent someone to inform the Ministry of Works. It's rare for Sir Ren to come so late. Tong Zhenye laughed at the top of his lungs when he saw Renbaqian. After all, Renbaqian had always been punctual, and this time, he had been here for almost an hour. I met an old friend. Renbaqian smiled and didn't want to talk about it. I heard it's a little girl. Tong Zhenye was gossipy, and his eyes were wide open. If Her Majesty finds out, don't let your imagination run wild. Renbaqian really wanted to give him a kick. She's my only disciple. Disciple? Isn't everyone in the academy like that? Tong Zhenye was puzzled. In this era, teachers preached and students answered questions. The students in the academy could be said to be Renbaqian's disciples. Whether it was Great Xia, the Yun nation, or even Dao's predecessor, the Hao nation, they were all like this. They learned different things. Renbaqian waved his hand and interrupted Tong Zhenye's gossip. I'm here to find out how much progress has been made over the past year. After spending the afternoon at the Ministry of Works, Renbaqian understood the current progress. First was the road to the Yun nation. The progress had reached 40%, which was good news. This 40% progress had already saved some time for travel between the two places. Second was the promotion of high-yield crops, which had finally solved the food crisis. Then, there was the construction of blast furnaces in Dao and the Yun nation. At this point, Tong Zhenye couldn't help but ask, when will your batch of students graduate? You must send them to me when the time comes, and I will arrange a good position for them. Over the past 6 months, many new blast furnaces had been built in the mines of Dao and the Yun nation, and these students had played a great role. Needless to say, they could also repair the equipment in the glass factory, the forging factory, the canning factory, the soap factory, and the salt well. They could also solve many problems that the craftsmen didn't understand. There were many equipment that the craftsmen couldn't understand even after studying for a long time, but they could figure it out after a few days. There were also trains and the power plant that Tong Zhenye knew. Tong Zhenye kept an eye on these students every day. He had already decided that if anyone dared to compete with him, he would first teach them a lesson. It will take at least another year, Renbaqian said casually. He felt very complicated when he said this. It was as if the unripe cabbage that he had been raising in his field for a long time was going to be taken advantage of by someone else. He wanted the first batch of students to finish the 6-year high school curriculum, but unfortunately, he couldn't wait that long. Currently, Dao was lacking people everywhere. The Yun nation was so big that they could only rely on the people of the Yun nation to govern because there were no qualified officials. The Ministry of Works lacked technical officials, the Ministry of Revenue lacked officials who knew mathematics, and the Ministry of Appointments, the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Rights, and even his own Ministry of Commerce were all lacking people. Although his students didn't have much experience, they were at least literate, had basic knowledge of mathematics, physics, and chemistry, and had been nurtured by him for a long time. As long as they worked for a while, they would become the new blood of their respective departments. Compared to other departments, Renbaqian also felt that the Ministry of Works was very suitable for them, but not every disciple liked to deal with machinery every day. At the same time, Renbaqian felt that there was another position that was more suitable for them than the Ministry of Works, being a teacher. There were more than 40 students in this batch. If each of them led a class, there would be more than 40 classes immediately. If each class had 50 students, there would be at least 2,000 students. This was a huge number. Furthermore, in the process of leading the students, they could continue to learn from him. Of course, this depended on their intentions when the time came. Wu Ming didn't have a chapter name, he couldn't think of one. Should it be called Wu Ming Ai? Chapter 8:18. As soon as he returned to Deo, Renbachian was so busy that he even put the wedding in 2 months at the back of his mind. After all, many things could happen in a year. Not to mention Deo, which was gradually developing. The current situation of the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Commerce, the gradual recovery of Tianjin Basin, the promotion of the embroidered uniform guards in the rearguard commandery, the situation of the captives who were building roads, and the many students in the academy. Although there were robots as teachers this year, there were still some gaps compared to humans. The first batch of students who could graduate in 3 years would take 6 more months to graduate. Not to mention the Yun nation, which had just been annexed. This was an entire country that was about 60% the size of Deo, with more than 400 cities, countless villages, and a population of 70 to 80 million. At present, this country was still ruled by Zi Donglai's military force, the warlords who had surrendered, and some of the people of the Yun nation who had sought refuge with them. Renbachian didn't know what those people would turn the Yun nation into, but one thing was certain, it definitely wouldn't be what he wanted. Therefore, he needed to spend a lot of time to understand all aspects of the Yun nation and then make suggestions to the Empress. Although it was a suggestion, it could basically be implemented. After all, the Empress had no experience in occupying a country, and even the big shots in the court didn't have any. Although Renbachian didn't have any experience, he had at least eaten pork before. In addition to his experience in Tianjin Basin, he also had thousands of years of history on Earth. At present, even the national sentiments of the two countries weren't an important issue. The most important thing was to promulgate a series of regulations to stabilize the Yun nation and design a new system for it. For example, the Yun nation would be set up as a protectorate with several prefectures under it. Each city would still be managed by the warlords and given orders by the protectorate, allowing the people of the Yun nation to manage themselves. However, the military and the government had to be separated. In addition to the 500 Aboriginal soldiers stationed in each city, there would also be city guards of varying numbers. The city guards would no longer be the private army of the warlords, but a separate department. There were a series of new policies. As for the opinions of the warlords, they could choose to say no, but they needed to test whether their necks or knives were harder. Although this would cause a certain amount of panic and chaos, the Yun nation was too big. If they wanted to quickly pull the Yun nation into Deo's orbit, this could only be done this way. These days, these matters occupied a lot of Renbachian's energy. In addition, he was also busy with the new thermal power plant and light bulb factory. Neither is difficult. Sometimes, Renbachian even thanked the heavens for being able to travel back and forth. In the construction of technology, no matter what problems they encountered, they could always find the answers and solutions when they returned to Earth. The new power plant was located in the west of Lon City. It was only 5 kilometers away from Lon City. After its completion, it would provide Lon City with enough electricity for its current needs. As for the light bulb factory, it wasn't too much trouble. Although he hadn't found the tungsten ore yet, he could still use carbonized bamboo. The only problem was that it consumed too much electricity and had a short duration. A single bulb could only be used for 4 months. For other transmigrators, this would be a good choice. However, he had a better idea, which was to bring back tungsten wire from Earth. After all, the consumption of tungsten filament used for light bulbs was very low. Renbachian could bring back a ton of tungsten filament from one trip, which was enough to make hundreds of thousands of light bulbs. All that was left was to slowly search for tungsten ore or a substitute for tungsten filament. The glass was not a problem. With the tungsten wire, all that was left was to inject nitrogen. Before the wedding, Renbachian was confident that the entire Lon City would become a sleepless city. During this period of time, he didn't even have much time to have lunch with the Empress. Every day, someone would send the bento made by the imperial kitchen to the school. After school, he would have to go and do the next thing after eating the bento. Fortunately, after more than half a month, Renbochin finally finished dealing with most of the piled-up matters and had some free time. The first thing he did when he was free was to go to the Zhang family, a family of craftsmen who had surrendered before the attack on the Yun nation. Greetings, Principal Ren. After receiving news of Renbochin's arrival, almost all the higher-ups of the Zhang family were waiting at the door and gave him the highest treatment. Currently, Renbochin had many other identities, such as the head of the Ministry of Commerce and the chief of the rearguard commandery. However, the most well-known ones were the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy and the future prince consort. In addition, Renbochin also had a more important identity in their eyes. Whether it was the precision clocks, the powerful cannons, the running steam trains, or the legendary power plant, all of these represented that Renbochin had a lot of knowledge in his mind. Not to mention, he had defeated them in brewing, dyeing, forging, and so on. It could be said that Renbochin was far ahead of them in all walks of life. If they were a family of craftsmen who controlled more than half of the 360 trades, Renbochin would be a grandmaster who was above them. Furthermore, it wasn't just one trade, but many other trades. In the eyes of the Zhang family, these things were more attractive to them than to the other princes. This was because these things were also the foundation of their existence. Let's talk inside. Renbochin and the others entered the residence and could still hear the sound of smithing coming from the side courtyard. I heard that your recent results have been pretty good. Renbochin asked with a smile after sitting down. Although he was here to see the current situation of the Zhang family, he was also very concerned about their progress in clocks. Nowadays, the Zhang family would make some clocks every month and sell them in the stores of the imperial family, which was quite profitable. After all, this kind of machine that accurately measured time was very attractive to anyone, especially those high-ranking officials in the imperial court. If they didn't install glass windows, a set of glass cups, a clock in the living room, and some spices when cooking, how could they show their status? They would become a joke. In just over a year, these high-ranking officials had become loyal customers of Renbochin's various products. Not only did the Zhang family make clocks, but they had also been doing research and had achieved some results. Bring it to Sir. Following the voice, someone quickly placed a fist-sized clock in front of Renbochin. 7 or 8 old men were sitting there stroking their beards with a proud look on their faces. Although the internal structure of the clock wasn't too complicated, it wasn't simple either. Limited by the current level of forging, it was only thanks to the skills of the Zhang family's craftsmen that they could shrink the clock to this size. If it were anyone else, they would definitely not be able to do this. Renbochin held the pocket clock in his hand and played with it. It was the size of a fist, 2 fingers thick, and the outer shell was made of metal. Except for the lack of glass, it was a qualified table clock. Yes, the Zhang family used this as a pocket clock. This size was enough to carry around. Nowadays, in Lan City, one could see the clock tower by looking up, but outside of Lan City, one had to look up at the sky to determine the time. And with this thing, time was something that everyone could accurately observe. However, in Renbochin's eyes, this was only a table clock. If this thing was made more sturdy, it would be a good choice to place it on the chest as a heart-protecting mirror. It was still too big. Well done. I hope you can make it smaller. After fiddling with it for a while, Renbochin handed the table clock to the guard and prepared to show it to the Empress. If it was the Empress in the past, this thing might have surprised her. However, the Empress was now more experienced and knowledgeable. It wasn't easy to surprise her anymore. This made Renbochin feel somewhat regretful. Sir, we are working hard to make it smaller, but it will be difficult to achieve in a short period of time, an old man from the Zhang family said. Renbochin nodded as he had expected this. After that, everyone changed the topic. Ren Baqian learned about the current situation of the Zhang family. Currently, there were more than 1,000 members of the Zhang family in Lan City, which was already a large number. After all, although there were 6,000 to 7,000 members of the Zhang family, many of them worked in businesses, horse and carriage companies, textiles, and other industries. At present, there was no use for them in Lan City, so they stayed in the Yun Nation to make things easier for the rearguard commandery. The Zhang family's residence was next to Jing Street, so they wouldn't be disturbed by too many people. The only thing lacking was that Lan City was relatively short of resources, which couldn't be compared to the prosperous Yun Nation. However, with the inclusion of the Yun Nation, this aspect would start to improve. Sir, we want to make more contributions. The strength of the Zhang family isn't just in forging and manufacturing clocks. After explaining the situation, the Zhang family's tone changed. Of course, I'm not going to let so many of you idle here. In fact, there are a few places where you are needed. Ren Baqian smiled. He had such a plan this time. It was too wasteful for such a family of craftsmen to make such a small amount of things. Hearing Ren Baqian's words, everyone immediately became spirited. They had been in Lan City for a year and a half, but due to their status as outsiders, the Zhang family was still limited to this small area. This was really not what they wanted to see. If this was the case, they might as well go to Great Xia. After hearing Ren Baqian's words, they could finally get involved in more industries. After explaining the arrangements for the Zhang family, Ren Baqian thought for a while and said, "By the way, the school will be recruiting students next year. If there are any intelligent children in the Zhang family, you can send a few of them to the school. The number of students won't exceed 3. The school couldn't always only have aboriginals. Since he was going to recruit his disciple into the school next year, he might as well recruit a class. In addition to the Zhang family, he could also recruit some from the Jing tribe." "Thank you, sir." Everyone was delighted. Chapter 8:19. This is cotton seed, which can be woven into clothes. It's much more comfortable than leather clothes, and it's also cheaper. This is a type of subtropical crop. You can try to grow it in the northern regions near Great Xia. Ren Baqian placed a few bags in front of Guihong. At present, those high-yielding crops have been popularized throughout the entire territory of Dayou. There were traces of these crops even in Tianjing Basin. The food problem had been solved, and the Department of Agriculture and Livestock could now focus on other areas. Cotton was naturally one of the most important economic crops. It had a vast market and was closely related to the livelihood of the people. After all, the weather in Dayou was extremely hot all year round. Clothes made of cotton were much cooler and more breathable than leather clothes. At the same time, they were finer than coarse cloth. Furthermore, after mass planting, the price might even be lower than the current price of coarse cloth in Dayou. It was sufficiently attractive. Regardless of whether it was for personal use or sold in the Yun Nation, it could create a very high value. Of course, although the animal skin clothing was hot to wear, it also had an advantage: it was sturdy. The mountain people fought with ferocious beasts every day. The sturdy animal skin clothes that could be made from local materials would not be obsolete for a long time. Cotton had a very high status in Ren Baqian's heart, but it wasn't that important in Guihong's eyes. After all, compared to clothes, he preferred crops like sweet potatoes, and pumpkins that could fill his stomach in large quantities. However, where there was demand, there would be development. When cotton cloth appeared on the market and the prices of some crops began to drop, Guihong knew the value of cotton. This is sugar cane. It's as sweet as honey. Most importantly, it has a high yield. It's a pretty good fruit and can also be used to make sugar. Sugar. Guihong caught the word. The kind brought by the merchants from the Yun Nation. Yes, that's right, and it's even better than theirs, Renbochin said confidently. In fact, he didn't know what kind of sugar the Yun nation's merchants had brought. The palace had always used honey. However, due to the limitations of this era, Renbochin felt that the Yun nation's merchants' sugar definitely couldn't reach the level of white sugar, which was why he was so confident. Sugarcane was not only a type of fruit, but most importantly, it could be used as a seasoning in the market. Moreover, he could also open a sugar factory. He was confident about the future of the sugar factory. The Empress alone could support half of the sugar factory. He had even thought of the name. Anyway, no one would sue him for copyright infringement. After confirming that Guihong valued the sugar cane sufficiently, Renbochin took out the last item, which was also the item that he valued the most. These are sunflowers and peanuts. The fruits can be used as food and can produce about 500 caddies per mu. They can also be used to extract oil. They are not as greasy as animal fat, and the price is very low. This is very important and must be arranged as soon as possible, Renbochin exhorted. With melon seeds, Renbochin felt that in the future, he might be able to see two groups of people fighting on the streets while a group of onlookers munched on melon seeds and peanuts. However, he didn't say his true thoughts out loud because the other party wouldn't understand even if he did. What he really wanted was biodiesel. Although the steam train was still in the warehouse outside the city, he had already set his sights on another product that would change the times. Not a car, but a tractor. In the entire territory of Dayo, there were only 3 to 4 million aboriginals outside the 60,000 mountains. The Yun nation was only half the size of Dayo, but it had a population of 70 to 80 million. With such a small population spread over such a large area of land, it was like scattering beans into the desert. Not only did these 3 to 4 million people have to graze and farm, but they also needed manpower for all kinds of factories. Whether it was salt wells, steel factories, or canneries. There was also the supply and logistics of the army and the militias of the various cities. With 3 to 4 million people spread over such a large area of land, it was like scattering beans into the desert. To solve this situation, on the one hand, part of the population had to be moved out of the 60,000 mountains, and on the other hand, part of the population had to be liberated from the fields. A tractor was an excellent choice. It was sturdy, easy to maintain, had strong traction, could do farm work, and could even haul goods. Although it was far from being comparable to a car, compared to an ox cart, it was like a tortoise racing against a snail. Furthermore, the terrible soil of Dayo had less of an impact on a tractor than an ox cart. In Renbochin's eyes, there was nothing more suitable for the current situation in Dayo than a tractor. Even the manufacture of a tractor wasn't a big problem. The only problem was the energy source. At present, there were no clues about oil, so biodiesel was the only choice. Therefore, in Renbochin's opinion, these two crops were the most important. Got it, I will arrange it. Guihong agreed when he saw how serious Renbochin was. Renbochin's value had long been reflected in various new products or technologies such as glass, high-yield crops, solar furnaces, and steam engines. Anything that could make him value it so much must be good stuff. Although Guihong didn't know Renbochin's purpose, his thoughts were as simple as mentioned above. In any case, it could at least be used as food. There was no such thing as too many varieties of food. Renbochin then took out soybeans, which were also a very valuable crop. They could be used to extract oil, make tofu, tofu pudding, make soy sauce, and make soy milk. Together with sugar cane, Renbochin was looking forward to the discussion in Dayo about whether soy milk and tofu pudding should be sweet or savory. The war between the sweet and savory parties spread from Earth to the other world. The only problem was that the Empress was the biggest supporter of the evil sweet party. After leaving the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, Renbochin and the guards returned to the palace and encountered another fight. However, there was something different this time. Knives were used. With the occupation of the Yun nation, Dayo no longer had to worry about the source of weapons due to the large amount of iron ore. The weapons seized from the Yun nation and Great Xia were melted down. Coupled with the production of Mount Damo's iron ore, steel products began to appear on the market, and the price dropped a lot. A large number of weapons appeared on the market, and the first problem had already emerged. The fights between the aboriginals had evolved from fists to knives. Renbochin sat on his mount and looked down at the fight that was surrounded by the crowd. He frowned and said to the guards, "Send them to the Public Order Bureau." "Yes, sir." A guard behind him jumped onto the scene and quickly pinned the two of them to the ground. Seeing that there was no more excitement to watch, the excited commoners dispersed. Renbochin frowned and returned to the Empress's palace. A few female officials were surrounding the Empress and measuring her clothes. The Empress didn't look unhappy at all and allowed them to circle her with rulers. After waiting for a long time, those female officials came over and measured Renbochin's body again. "Your Majesty, this is..." Renbochin didn't know how to react. The Empress rolled her eyes at him, turned around, and picked up her tablet to watch a television series. Renbochin thought for a while and realized that this was probably a wedding dress. After the female officials left, Renbochin sat beside the Empress and took a look. The Empress seemed to be watching a fantasy romance, action, ethics, and science fiction television series. Renbochin cleared his throat and said, "Your Majesty, I saw something when I came back just now. I feel that it's not a good sign." "Oh." The Empress didn't want to pay attention to him at first, but after hearing his last sentence, she immediately turned her head. Renbochin told her what he saw just now. The Empress looked at him doubtfully and asked, "What's wrong?" "They used knives." Renbochin looked serious. And then the Empress continued to look at him as if she could see a flower blossoming on his face. Renbochin had to admit that using knives wasn't as serious as it seemed to the Empress. This was the difference between a world where martial arts were respected and a modern era of peace. Compared to fists, using knives is more likely to lead to unnecessary casualties, Renbochin said seriously. In particular, the aboriginals were easily hot-headed. "But I can't possibly forbid them from carrying weapons," the Empress said casually. Renbochin couldn't understand the importance of weapons in the hearts of the aboriginals who fought with beasts. At first, Renbochin really had the idea of implementing a ban on knives. Even if it was only in the city. However, another idea popped up in Renbochin's mind, and he felt that it was more feasible. "Your Majesty, it's not a solution for them to fight on the streets every day over trivial matters," Renbochin said. The Empress thought for a while and said, "The imperial court doesn't have a good solution for this matter. Even if they get whipped and can't get out of bed for 3 days, they will forget about it when they are hot-headed. As for being too strict, it's not appropriate. After all, fighting and courage are the foundation of the aboriginals. In Lon City, one would be whipped if they fought. The barbed whip could tear off several pieces of flesh with just 3 lashes. However, this didn't dampen their enthusiasm for PK. "That's why it's better to let it go," Renbochin said. Seeing that the Empress was looking at him, he continued, "Build a fighting arena in the city, or call it a fighting ring or wrestling ring. If there is a conflict, it must be resolved in the fighting arena and money must be paid. If there is a private fight in the city, give them a more severe punishment. Since 3 lashes weren't enough to wake them up, 30 lashes would be used. They would have a clear choice between getting whipped 30 times or going to the fighting arena to resolve the conflict. Furthermore, walking to the fighting arena was enough for them to sober up. Even if they still had to fight, there wouldn't be any casualties under the restrictions of the fighting arena. Furthermore, with the number of fights in Lon City every day, Renbochin felt that the fighting arena would be able to generate revenue as long as they collected a little money each time. Chapter 820. In a certain city in Great Xia, after the flames of war, the city was full of scorch marks and blood-soaked soil. A rancid smell came from every corner of the city, and the volunteer army in khaki clothes couldn't help but cover their noses and quickly pass by. This was already the third day since the fall of this city. The originally powerful Great Xia suddenly seemed to have collapsed, and the flames of war spread everywhere within its borders. All of this happened so suddenly. It happened so quickly that most people didn't even know what was happening before they were swept up in this turbulence. At this time, in the original residence of an aristocratic family in the city, Qing Lian was sitting in a room reading a book attentively. Occasionally, she would look up at the people in front of her who were discussing. As the commander-in-chief, Su Qing had a murderous aura around him. After all, identity and experience shaped a person's temperament. Beside him was military advisor Su Yu, an unassuming, fair-skinned fatty who looked more like a merchant than anything else. In addition, there were strategists Shuo Wan, Lin Ping, Xiao Xianyi, Vanguard Jing Huan, General Qi Gua, Commander Xian Hai, and so on. It could be said that half of the senior officials of the volunteer army were here. At this time, an important meeting was naturally about the future direction of the volunteer army, but Qing Lian wasn't interested at all. Seeing that she was holding a book and not paying attention at all, everyone was used to it. Even Su Qing couldn't do anything about it. Even if the others were dissatisfied, they wouldn't express it at this time. After all, Qing Lian's abilities had been completely revealed. No one could compare to her in terms of the overall situation, and she had no interest in power. No one would easily offend such a capable and already senior official of the volunteer army. Not to mention, Qing Lian's strength was equivalent to that of a spirit will expert, the top combat power of the volunteer army. Although Qing Lian was holding a book at this time, her mind was thinking about the wedding of Black Bamboo Academy's principal and Qi Zixiao in a month's time. Her gift was still a little too meager. It seemed that she still had to go to Su Qing to get some treasures. After all, he had studied at the Black Bamboo Academy for a long time. Before he left, the Black Bamboo Academy even allowed him to bring a few books on mathematics and probability. This was considered generous. If the gifts he gave were too meager, it would be too embarrassing. At this thought, Qing Lian looked up at Su Qing and found that everyone seemed to have finished their discussion. Su Qing solemnly asked military counselor Su Yu, "Next, we'll march to Ruge Pass." "Military counselor, what do you think of the outcome?" Military advisor Su Yu's face was like a dumpling, and his eyes were only a slit. If one didn't look carefully, it would be hard to tell if his eyes were open or closed. He muttered a few words softly, then raised his head and said to everyone, "Great Xia will definitely win this battle." Even though everyone in the hall used to be citizens of Great Xia, they were now part of the revolutionary army. Everything they did was to overthrow Great Xia. Of course, there was no lack of people who wanted to rob money, food, and territory. However, in general terms, everyone agreed that the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty was the enemy. However, after Su Yu said, "Great Xia will win," everyone was delighted. Those who didn't know would think that they were the generals of Great Xia. If an outsider heard this and saw everyone's expressions, they might start to doubt their own lives. Or perhaps, he suspected that there were spies from Great Xia in the tent. "That's good," Su Qing said happily. Now that the military counselor had said that, he felt more confident. As long as he said that Great Xia would definitely win, it meant that Great Xia would definitely lose. In the beginning, the revolutionary army had elite soldiers, while Great Xia had old, weak, and disabled soldiers. Everyone thought that they would definitely win, and so did the military counselor. However, those few battles resulted in failure. Even the generals who led the troops felt that it was inexplicable and completely didn't know how they lost. They could only ask a few questions afterwards, and only then did they find out that it was a series of small things that were linked together and affected the outcome of the battle. Even so, everyone felt that the failure was too unexpected. For a period of time, the entire revolutionary army was in a state of panic. Many people thought that the gods had abandoned them and were standing on the side of the opponent. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why a situation that was supposed to be a sure victory would end in such an inexplicable defeat. Then, the turning point suddenly came, and it caught everyone off guard. A battle that everyone was prepared for failure in order to reduce losses was inexplicably won. After experiencing a few more defeats, everyone realized that as long as the military counselor said that the side would win, it would definitely lose. Even if there were many elite soldiers and even if they were fully prepared, it would still be the same. Unless it was an irreparable situation where one person was facing 100 people. As long as there was a trace of possibility, even if 1,000 people encountered 5,000 elite soldiers in the field, the situation would be completely opposite of what the military counselor said. Even Qing Lian was extremely curious about this magical phenomenon. She even tried to find out the secrets of the other party, but to no avail. Naturally, the position of the military counselor became more and more stable. Everyone even suspected that if they were to face Dao, the military counselor would be able to help them win. Qing Lian searched for a long time, but still couldn't figure out how the other party did it. However, if Rinpoche knew, he would definitely understand that the military counselor was simply a living mascot and nanny. Furthermore, it was a top-notch poisonous nanny. What a talent! After everyone in the hall left, Qing Lian said to the last military counselor, "Suyu, you should lose weight. Otherwise, you won't be able to find a horse that can carry you." Suyu looked helpless. "I have only eaten one bowl of rice every day for the past month and relied on drinking water for the rest of the time. However, I have gained another 5 kilograms. Suyu's face was full of doubts about his own physique. "Or can I help you? My sword is very fast and can reduce the pain to a minimum. Furthermore, I have the black mud cream from Lon City," Qing Lian said with ill intentions. "Forget it. Being fat makes me look rich. My wife likes me to be fat." Suyu waved his hands and strode out of the hall. When only Qing Lian and Su Qing were left, the latter relaxed her body and said, "Speak." Normally, Qing Lian would have been the first to run away. Since he stayed until the end today, he definitely had something to tell her. "You have found the Shi family's treasury, right?" "I want to go in and get some things," Qing Lian said. At the same time, she calculated in her heart that the other party would definitely agree. However, there was a 90% chance that he wanted her to agree to one of his conditions. There was an 80% chance that he wanted her to restrain herself and not bring a book to every meeting. "What do you need?" Su Qing was puzzled at first, but he knew that Qing Lian wasn't as fond of, or even greedy for, things like wealth and jewelry. Therefore, he replied indifferently, "Sure, but you have to agree to one condition. During the next military meeting, even if you don't like it, I can allow you to be distracted, but don't hold a book there. If everyone is like you, how can I manage them?" Su Qing felt a headache coming on. Qing Lian smiled, and her eyes were like crescent moons. It was just as he had expected. Now, everything was like a river in his eyes, and within the river, there would be tributaries. Chapter 821. Gao Shan turned to look at the dilapidated city behind him. That was Qingtang Pass, which used to be the border between the Yun Nation and Dao. After passing through that pass, they would enter Dao's territory. Of course, Qingtang Pass was no longer used to guard the border. The entire Yun Nation had fallen under Dao's shining steel saber. Gao Shan looked at it for a while before slowly retracting his gaze and focusing on the queue. This was a team of thousands of people from hundreds of cities in the Yun nation. It was filled with congratulatory gifts for Dao's Empress, Qi Zixiao. Some of them were warlords, but some of them had just been appointed by Donglai and didn't have much foundation. Replacing them were aristocratic families from various cities. These aristocratic families changed their allegiance faster than ordinary people. After the fall of the Yun nation, most of them surrendered to Dao without any backbone. As for sneaking into this team and heading to Dao, it was easier than previously thought. Donglai, who had killed countless people, only needed a list of names to let these people go to Dao. He originally thought that they would carefully check everyone's identity, but they didn't. It seemed that Donglai never thought that there would be people with ulterior motives mixed into this team heading to Dao's capital. It wasn't that he didn't think about it, but he simply didn't care. No one could cause any trouble under the nose of dozens of spirit will experts, not to mention that Qi Zixiao, the fourth most powerful expert in the world, was sitting in the palace. With the release of the latest list of the world's experts, the news that Tingyu, the fourth most powerful expert in the world, had died at the hands of Qi Zixiao finally spread. Today, the first and second most powerful experts in the world had been in hiding for a long time. It was really surprising that the third and fourth most powerful experts were actually women. Now, countless people were guessing who would win the battle between the third and fourth most powerful expert in the world. In just a few years, Qi Zixiao had risen from the seventh most powerful expert in the world to the fourth most powerful expert in the world. These people who had died were all killed by her. One had to know that Qi Zixiao was only 26 years old. Gao Yishan touched his chest, where his goal was. As long as he could get Qi Zixiao to place this thing in the palace hall, the Yun nation would still have a chance. After traveling for 3 days, the surrounding scenery had changed. A few people could often be seen measuring something on the side of the road. These people were aboriginals. This made them very curious as to what these aboriginals were doing in the wilderness. After traveling for another day, Gao Yishan saw the prisoners of war that were captured by Dao. Groups of prisoners of war laid a layer of stones on the ground. Then, they used a mud-like substance to pave the road. There were also people who pushed a huge stone mill to flatten the layer of mud on the road. Although he did not know what the mud was, Gao Yishan immediately understood that the other party was repairing the road. He wanted to build a road from Dao to the Yun nation. This caused Gao Yishan's heart to tighten. He knew the significance of a smooth road. If this road was repaired, it would be faster to travel from Dao to the Yun nation. The righteous people in the Yun nation would have a hard time, and it would be harder for them to overthrow Dao. This was not something the barbarians would do. It must have been someone else's idea. He had heard that Qi Zixiao's husband was not an aboriginal. Perhaps it had something to do with him. As the convoy progressed, he saw more prisoners of war. All the prisoners would stop and look at the convoy when they saw it, as if they wanted to see if they could see familiar people. However, they were greeted by unfamiliar faces. However, what surprised everyone in the convoy was that there seemed to be something wrong with these soldiers who were captured by Dao. In their imaginations, the captives were like the people in the mines, working endlessly. As soon as they stopped, they would be greeted by the whips and kicks of the aboriginals. Their expressions were numb, their eyes were devoid of color, and they wore tattered clothes. They couldn't even take a bath for several months, and their bodies were weak. However, the prisoners of war in front of them were not like this. Their clothes were indeed tattered and dirty. However, when they stopped and looked at the convoy, no one whipped them. After looking around for a moment, they lowered their heads and continued with their work. Their bodies were not weak and could even be said to be strong. It was not just one or two of them, but most of them were like this. The most important thing was that their expressions were not numb or lifeless. Instead, they looked like ordinary people. At most, they looked a little more fervent. After all, They saw visitors from the Yun nation and people from their hometown, so it was easy to understand their gazes. However, it made the people in the convoy feel a little strange. It seemed that these people were a little different from the captives they had imagined. They had even thought that someone would rush over and beg them to save them. When there was no hope, seeing a convoy from their hometown was very likely to happen. This also made them nervous. If that happened, it was best to pretend not to see it. In the end, this did not happen. It was unexpectedly calm. Perhaps it was because most of these people were from the original army and were stronger. Well, it was a joke that the Yun nation's army was strong. Even the people of the Yun nation didn't believe it. Other than the original Western City army, the other armies could be said to be a bunch of bandits. Perhaps these people were the Western City army. That was possible. At the thought of this, the way everyone looked at those people changed. Although the Yun nation was no more, the Western City army still had a considerable position in the hearts of the people of the Yun nation. After all, this was a real army. When they were resting, they realized that the accompanying Aboriginal guards didn't mind them coming into contact with the captives, so both sides naturally started to chat. However, what surprised the people in the convoy was that these captives weren't from the Western City army. Most of them were city guards, and some were even ordinary people. This surprised everyone a little. As they continued to chat, there were more and more things that surprised them. First was the food. Their food was unexpectedly good. Every meal was meat and broth. Do you have vegetables? Can you give me some on account of us being from the same hometown? Less is fine too. I'm about to vomit from eating broth. Although there are pumpkins and potatoes, they taste the same when stewed with meat. This made the faces of everyone in the convoy turn black. Many of them hadn't lived a life of eating meat for every meal yet. It was already good enough for ordinary people to eat meat once a year. Some low-level officials could only eat meat once a week to once a month. You guys are actually about to vomit from eating meat. Do the people of the Yun nation and low-level officials not have better food than the captives? Then, they revealed some information about the captive camp. For example, there were 10 people in a small team, and the team leaders were all from the Yun nation. There were 100 people in a platoon, and the platoon leader was an Aboriginal while the deputy platoon leader was still from the Yun nation. It could be said that they were managing themselves, so there weren't that many guards. For example, as long as they completed their work, they could rest for a while without being punished. Of course, they could also rest if they didn't finish their work. However, if they didn't finish their work at night, the entire team would be punished. For example, they actually had a little salary every month. Although it wasn't much, it was enough for them to buy 2 sets of clothes, the cheapest soap, and some miscellaneous grains to improve their diet. They could even buy 2 bottles of low-quality wine. For example, they were held captive for 10 years. From the 3rd year onward, their salary would gradually increase, and after 10 years, they would be free. Many people in the convoy had heard of this news, but hearing it personally from these captives and seeing their expectant gazes gave them a very different feeling. Gao Shan listened calmly, but he frowned when he returned to the car. What these captives said made him understand one thing: the Aboriginals had changed. Although he had sensed it when he was in the Yun nation, this feeling had never been as clear as it was now. They had changed their previous style. They no longer only knew how to burn, kill, and plunder. Instead, they had started to use gentler methods to appease the people. The treatment of these captives was even better than that of many of the poor people in the Yun nation. It was also much better than the people in the mines. He wasn't the only one who felt this way. Many people in the convoy also felt this way. However, the reaction of the people in the convoy was completely different. Everyone else was rejoicing. This change in the Aboriginals was a good thing for them. Half a day later, they finally saw the road that the captives had built. It was a straight gray hard road that seemed to be paved with a large stone slab. The carriage moved onto the road that had been completely solidified, and its speed more than doubled. Everyone felt the speed of the convoy and was shocked by this road. Even the Yun nation would find it difficult to build such a road, but the barbarians had actually done it. The rest of the journey was sometimes in mud, and sometimes there was a paved road. According to the captives, this was called a cement road. The Aboriginals had divided this road into several sections and built them at the same time. The closer they got to Lawn City, the more shocked everyone was. According to their calculations, the part of the road that had been repaired was more than 500 kilometers long. The total length would be more than 2,400 kilometers. What shocked them even more was the material used to build the road. In less than 2 years, they had built a road that was more than 500 kilometers long. It had to be known that the official roads of the Yun nation had been built over hundreds of years. Chapter 8:22. We've arrived at Lawn City. We're finally here. Gao Shan poked his head out of the carriage and saw a long black line appearing on the horizon in the distance. That was the city wall of Lawn City. The Han nation had once invested a lot of manpower into this imperial city. However, the Han nation had vanished, and all that was left was Dao. Gao Shan inexplicably thought of the Yun nation, which had fallen into the same situation as the Han nation. If he failed, the Yun nation would probably only appear in poems and history for people to evaluate in a few decades. Perhaps there would be future generations standing outside Wangjing City with the same feelings as him. It didn't take much effort to enter the city. The only thing that made the convoy unhappy was the contempt in the eyes of the Aboriginal soldiers. However, they could only bear with it. After all, they were the losers and were living under the eaves. Furthermore, the barbarians had looked down on them for a long time. They also looked down on the barbarians. The barbarians felt that they were weak and incompetent. They thought that the barbarians were all brawn and no brains. We won't lower ourselves to the level of beasts. Many people comforted themselves. Gao Shan watched all this quietly and suddenly felt a sense of sorrow. The military discipline of these barbarians was actually better than that of the Yun nation. At least, they didn't have the arrogant style of the Yun nation's city guards. Not only did they let the convoy pass, but they also let the Aboriginal commoners pass with a wave of their hands. Thinking about the warlords and city guards of the Yun nation who were full of grease, they would scrape off a layer of soil even if they carried a load of soil over. After spending some time passing through the city gate, everyone was attracted by the towering clock tower in the center of the city. Before entering the city, everyone could already see the towering building. After entering the city, they could finally see it clearly. "Look, that thing is moving," someone said doubtfully. "This seems to be a tool for keeping time." Very quickly, someone understood the purpose of the clock. This caused another wave of surprise. Is someone inside constantly turning those clocks? As soon as this was said, the Aboriginals who heard this looked at them as if they were looking at fools. Apart from the bell tower in the distance, the strangest thing was the 3 zhang tall poles erected by the roadside. There was one pole every 30 or 40 steps, with a horizontal arm at the top. If one covered the lower half of the pole with one's palm, one would see that the top was like a cross. At the two ends of the arm, there were 2 circular transparent covers. There was something inside the transparent cover. Everyone stared at it for a long time, but they still couldn't figure out what it was. "It looks a little like ding ding," someone said in a low voice, immediately causing a small laugh. Many people began to wonder if it was a totem that worshipped reproduction. Although this world did not have such a concept, it did not prevent them from having similar ideas. At this moment, Rinba Qin was standing in Qingxin Palace Hall. He had stayed in this place for a period of time and was very familiar with everything. No matter what happened on the outside, Qingxin Palace Hall seemed to always be the same. Lin Qiaola and the old woman. Looking at this quantifier, Renbaqian felt that Lin Qiaola's quantifier could only be counted as only. Now that he had returned to Earth and saw chinchillas sold in pet shops, he would subconsciously think that they were of the same species as Lin Qiaola. At the very least, that short and furry tail looked like one. Lin Qiaola's tail wasn't as long and slender as a cat's or a mouse's. Instead, it was swollen like a squirrel's tail. However, it was short and only reached the knee, which was more similar to the chinchillas on Earth. At this moment, Lin Qiaola was dozing off on the ground behind Renbaqian. The sunlight shone in from outside the door and warmed the ground, making it much more comfortable than sitting on a chair. He was called over by Librarian Lin. The old woman who hid him in the shadows on the second floor of Qingxin Palace Hall was like a Shaolin monk sweeping the floor in his heart. The last time he appeared was to bring the yang boosting technique. After returning, he tried to improve it further, but Librarian Lin only revised the first step, which was the part that he practiced. The further he went, the more difficult it would be. It would involve more aspects, and it would be very difficult to revise it. If he had used a human cauldron from the beginning, he could have continued to practice the later parts of the technique. Unfortunately, he practiced the modified yang boosting technique, which was no longer the same as the original. Recently, he had been hearing Tong Jinya brag about the few Earth will experts from the Yun nation in the brothel, which made him itch. Perhaps those that Tong Jinya praised so much were the human cauldrons that were originally found for him. However, he thought about the Empress's vinegar jar. The higher the quality, the greater the danger. If he overturned them, in fact, there was nothing wrong with practicing the modified version. Renbaqian stood there in a daze for a long time. Supervisor Lin finally walked out of a room with 3 books in her hands and handed them to Renbaqian. She let out a weird laugh, sized him up, and returned to the second floor. Listening to this laugh, it sounded like a big boss villain. If it was someone with a bigger brain, they might have imagined that the big boss villain was hiding in the palace. On the surface, he was the director of the library, but he had been secretly engaged in illegal activities. Renbaqian flipped through the books and almost vomited blood. There were actually 3 erotic books. Why did Librarian Lin give him these things? Could it be that she felt that he had some misunderstanding about sex? After all, he was someone who had been baptized by a few TMN teaching materials, eh? After flipping through a few pages, Renbaqian suddenly exclaimed in surprise. The 3 books in his hand didn't only contain erotic books, but also contained other content. There were also words below each picture. It seemed to be a dual cultivation technique. This thing could be had. Librarian Lin only looked a little gloomy, but she was still a good person. After flipping through a few pages, Renbaqian stuffed the books into his arms and turned to leave. In the end, he stepped on something soft just as he turned. He didn't know when Lin Qiaola had rubbed against his foot. Renbaqian subconsciously covered his face with his arms. His wedding was in half a month, and he couldn't let her disfigure him no matter what. The 9 white bone claws that he expected didn't appear. Lin Qiaola jumped up and said, "You stepped on me, so I won't scratch you. Give me the candy." Renbaqian almost vomited blood again. He stretched out his hand and pointed at Lin Qiaola. His finger was almost poking the tip of her nose. Renbaqian trembled for a long time. Lin Qiaola had actually learned to cheat after staying on Earth for a year. Who taught her? Why didn't she learn from the good ones? Don't tell me you want to tell me that I don't have any candy and that I want my life. Lin Qiaola moved her face closer to Renbaqian's nose. She squinted her eyes and gave off a dangerous vibe. Renbaqian's fingers trembled for a long time. Not only did this fellow learn to cheat, but she also learned to answer first and act. She wasn't like this in the past. After leaving Qingxin Palace Hall, Ren Baqian cursed. He didn't expect that he would be cheated by Lin Qiaola one day. In the past, this lass used to sleep after eating and eat after waking up. Her IQ was equivalent to that of an 8-year-old. How did she suddenly change so much? Wait, could it be the effect of her previous transformation? After she stopped eating the jade-waisted slaves, her ears and eyebrows shrank back and seemed to have changed back. However, there were some changes in other aspects. Did her IQ increase? Ren Baqian turned to look at Qingxin Palace Hall and saw Lin Qiaola happily peeling the candy wrappers. It should be an illusion that her IQ had increased. It should be more suitable to say that she was driven to desperate action. There was nothing wrong with this phrase. Chapter 823. Ren Baqian strolled back to Pingle Park, flipped through the 3 erotic books, and shamefully erected a flag. They were indeed treasured by the imperial family. The drawings were lifelike, and Ren Baqian felt that they weren't inferior to those famous painters. For example, Van Gogh. The 3 books in his hands were much more realistic than his drawings. However, the main reason for erecting the flag was that he had been practicing the virgin technique ever since he was chosen by the Empress as her husband. Whoever practiced it would know. He didn't dare to sleep on his stomach because his bed would be full of holes when he woke up in the morning. After placing the erotic painting, dual cultivation method, on the table, Ren Baqian thought of something else. The fertility rate of the Aboriginals was low. Part of the reason was that they liked to court death, and part of the reason was that it was difficult for them to reproduce because they were too strong. These 2 points were easy to understand. For example, insects were born in piles of thousands. Amphibians and reptiles could give birth to dozens of children at a time. Although cats and dogs were born in litters, their numbers were also reduced to single digits. The higher the level of the creature, the lower the fertility rate. The Aboriginals were also humans, but they were much stronger than ordinary people. Therefore, it was understandable that their fertility rate was low. In addition to these 2 reasons, there was another important reason. The Aboriginals rarely clapped for love. Humans were creatures that were in heat all year round. The Aboriginals were the same, but they did it much less often than ordinary people. In this era, people in all countries went home at night to sleep and give birth. In the Aboriginals, they went home at night to sleep and beat their children. As a result, although the average lifespan of the Aboriginals was much higher than that of other countries, their fertility rate was pitifully low. Ren Baqian couldn't do anything about the first 2 reasons. However, he could think of a way to solve the 3rd reason. However, he couldn't let anyone know that he was the one who did it. 100 years later, people would write, Ren Baqian, the husband of the 3rd Emperor of Dao, the Prince of Dao, the founder of Black Bamboo Academy, the leader of ideas, and a famous physicist and chemist who opened the prelude to modern science and led the modernist construction of Dao. In addition, he was also the inventor and advocate of pornography and adult education films. He made indelible contributions to the promotion of pornography and adult education films. He was known as an advanced educator. How could he be a human? Of course, this wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that the Empress found out. Ren Baqian felt that it was better for him to be a person who only cared about helping others and not himself. In order to enrich the people's spare time, he should spare no effort and do good deeds without leaving his name behind. After making up his mind to be a good person, he placed the 3 books on the bedside table and headed to the Empress's palace. Along the way, he saw a few female officials instructing the maids to clean up the palace. Before the couple got married, the entire palace had to be cleaned up. Ren Baqian entered the palace and saw the Empress sitting on the couch with a computer screen in front of her. She had cake in her left hand and wine in her right hand. Xianzhe was standing below her and said, "Your Majesty, the people from the Yun nation are here. There are more than 4,000 of them. Let the Ministry of Rites make the arrangements." The Empress waved her hand. Renbaqian immediately knew what was going on. He reckoned that Xianzhe was entrusted by Great Elder Shi Qing. He immediately smiled and said, "Your Majesty, haven't you seen the former emperor of the Yun nation?" Xianzhe turned around and gave him a grateful look. Logically speaking, the emperor of a country should be very interested in another loser after expanding his territory. After all, at their level, it should be very satisfying to see another person of the same status submit to them and be able to control the other party's life and death. However, the Empress had been back for more than a month, but she didn't have the slightest interest in seeing the Emperor of the Yun nation and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to anyone who mentioned it. Now that the people from the Yun nation who came to send gifts had arrived, the Emperor was still in prison. It wasn't just the Emperor, but also the Empress, concubines, and more than a dozen others. What's there to see? I'm not interested in a child emperor. The Empress's words almost made Renbaqian laugh out loud. Where did she hear this from? However, it was more accurate to say that the other party was a child emperor. He wasn't young, only 23 years old. He was promoted to the throne at the age of 11, and since then, almost all of the power had fallen into the hands of Jing Qingmian. The title of emperor was just a title in name. If the Yun nation hadn't been destroyed, this emperor might have come to his senses after 10 or 20 years or continued living a befuddled life. There was always a chance. However, the Yun nation was gone now. You should go and see him. If he knows his place, find him a house in the city and let him spend the rest of his life in peace. If he has any complaints, behead him and hang him on the city wall, the Empress said after thinking for a while. Isn't my status inappropriate? Renbaqian smiled bitterly. In any case, he was the emperor of a nation. How could he decide whether he lived or died? Moreover, thousands of people came to send gifts, yet he was going to hang the former emperor on the wall. Just go when I ask you to. What's inappropriate about it? You are also Deos, Prince Consort. The Empress paused for a moment when she said the last 3 words. I'm not interested in wasting my time on a child emperor. Renbaqian felt that the biggest reason was that he was fascinated by the xianxue romance, magic fantasy, action ethics, and science fiction television series. How many episodes have you watched, Your Majesty? Renbaqian couldn't help but ask. 382 episodes. I thought you didn't like it. The Empress replied casually, leaving Renbaqian speechless. If he remembered correctly, 382 episodes were only halfway through. Renbaqian sighed, cupped his hands, and said, Your Majesty, I'll go take a look first and report back to you. Wait. The Empress suddenly thought of something and looked up. Your Majesty. I heard that his Empress is quite exquisite. Don't look at her. The Empress wrinkled her nose. No matter how beautiful she is, she can't be more beautiful than you, Your Majesty. Renbaqian cupped his hands and retreated. However, he was curious about how the Empress would talk to him alone. He wondered what the president was like. Where are they locked up? Renbaqian asked Xianzhe after leaving the palace. In the prison of the Ministry of War. Xianzhe was wearing a pair of red metal-framed glasses and armor, which gave her a unique style. However, one of the lenses was cracked. Cracks covered half of the lens, but it was a miracle that it hadn't shattered. Noticing Renbaqian's gaze, Xianzhe replied calmly, I accidentally bumped into it while practicing martial arts. I remember making 10 pairs for you at that time. They were all broken, but this is the most intact one. I see. I'll bring more pairs for you next time. Thank you, Sir Ren. Xianzhe's face, which was as cold as the Empress's, finally showed some expression. She looked happy. He rushed to the Ministry of War with the guards. Why is Principal Ren here? Qin Chuan, Tong Xinya's lifelong enemy and a shameless old hooligan, was a little curious. After all, Ren Baqin spent most of his time at the Ministry of Works and rarely came to the Ministry of War. The Empress of the Yun Nation. Cough, cough, cough. Where is the Emperor? Ren Baqin almost choked to death. Qin Chuan was shocked. He sized Ren Baqin up and asked, "Is it the Emperor or the Empress?" "It's the Emperor. Her Majesty doesn't want to see him, so she asked me to check on him," Ren Baqin quickly replied. As the ancient said, the first sentence spoken is usually the truth. Qin Chuan grinned as if he was happy to see a kindred spirit. Ren Baqin was speechless. Chapter 824. The prison at the Ministry of War was left behind by the Hao nation and hadn't been used for decades. This time, in order to welcome the Yun nation's emperor, it was specially renovated and covered with a new layer of straw. The prison was underground, and one could smell a musty and some other inexplicable smells when they opened the door. The original color of the iron door could no longer be seen, and its surface was covered with reddish-brown rust. There were a total of more than a dozen emperors and concubines of the Yun nation, and they were locked up in several rooms. In fact, it was enough to just send the emperor over, but Si Donglai was a rare good person and gave them a chance to reunite with their families. Since they had to be escorted anyway, they might as well pack up the emperor and his harem and send them over. When the iron door of the prison was opened, a ray of light broke through the darkness in the prison, and the people who were locked up woke up. The eyes of a young man in the prison lit up. This wasn't the time to deliver food. Who was it? Could it be that the Emperor of Dao was willing to see them? "Your Majesty." A woman beside the man called out softly. Her eyes were filled with apprehension, but she stood up and removed the straw from his hair. The woman wanted to get something from the man that could make her feel at ease, but she was disappointed. The man didn't pay any attention to her at all. It had been half a year since the emperor and concubines of the Yun nation were sent here. They originally thought that they would see the Empress of Dao after they arrived and that their lives would depend on her mood. However, they didn't expect that Qi Zixiao wasn't in Lan City. Everyone was locked up in this dark prison cell. For them, who had lived extravagantly since they were young, this was a torment worse than death. If there wasn't a glimmer of hope, many people would rather die than be locked up in such a place. After waiting for a few months, the Empress finally returned to Lan City, and everyone thought that Qi Zixiao would see them immediately. However, they were disappointed and couldn't understand why Qi Zixiao didn't have any intention of seeing them after 1.5 months. This made them feel bitter and angry, as if they had eaten yellow lotus. No matter what, they were still the royal family of the Yun nation. How could Qi Zixiao do this? How dare she? Was she really not going to see them? Not only did they not see Qi Zixiao, but even the officials who occasionally came to see them were gone. Every day, there would only be someone delivering food to them, and they seemed to have been forgotten. From expectation to disappointment, from anger to despair. However, with the sound of footsteps, their hopes rose again. As the old door in front of him opened, the Emperor of the Yun nation saw a spontaneously glowing body. Even in the dim environment of the prison cell, the man's body was glowing. "Is Qi Zixiao going to see me?" The Emperor of the Yun nation tried to keep his expression calm and maintain his last bit of dignity. If he had just been sent here, he would not have been able to do it. But after a few months, he could at least control some of his expressions. Ren Baqin stood outside the door and looked at the two people inside. They were wearing gray inner clothes, which he reckoned were originally white. The fact that it hadn't turned black meant that they were treated better than him. It was a young man in his 20s. It was said that he was 23, but he looked even older than him. To be able to speak in such a tone even after such a huge change, it seemed that the emperor was not as unbearable as the rumors said. This thought flashed across Renbachian's mind as he subconsciously looked at the person behind the emperor. If the empress hadn't mentioned it at that time, he wouldn't have cared. However, when the empress mentioned it, it made him curious. His face wasn't clean, but it wasn't to the extent that his appearance couldn't be seen. He was a little younger than the little emperor. It was said that he was only 20 years old. His figure was not bad, and when he looked at him, there was worry in his eyes. Renbachian only took a glance and was shocked. How could this face be considered exquisite? It was clearly unique. They had small eyes, big pancake faces, and sesame seeds were sprinkled on the pancakes. Was this the Empress of the Yun nation? Renbachian immediately felt deep veneration for this little emperor. His sense of beauty was so twisted that it could reach the sky. Of course, one couldn't rule out the possibility that the emperor might seem muddle-headed on the surface, but he had great ambitions in his heart, and the empress also had Zhong Wuyan's talent. Then, he shifted his gaze back to the Yun emperor. Chen Dongxing was a name that did not fit the identity of an emperor. Just like in Great Xia, the one who was killed by the stench was called Xia Bailong, and the new emperor was called Xia Yijiang. Her Majesty isn't going to see you. Renbachian told the truth. Chen Dongxing thought that Qi Zixia was going to see him this time. He didn't expect to hear such a sentence. His face was covered with anger again. Why? Why are there so many whys? Renbachian snorted. I'm here to see how you are doing here. When exactly is Qi Zixia going to see me? Chen Dongxing suppressed his anger and asked. She will see you when it's time, Renbachian replied faintly. In addition, although you used to be the emperor of the Yun nation, you are now a prisoner. It seems that you still don't understand your current status by calling Her Majesty by her name. Chen Dongxing's expression changed several times. Was he going to be locked up like this? Finally, he couldn't help but lower his head and close his eyes. I'm willing to surrender to the Emperor of Dayo and write a surrender letter in the name of the Emperor of the Yun nation. I hope to receive treatment that befits my status. After saying this, Chen Dongxing's body swayed as if he had lost all his strength. Renbachian sized him up again and said, I will report this matter to Her Majesty. When he closed the iron door again, he heard Chen Dongxing's loud voice saying, if I personally write a surrender letter, many people in the Yun nation will listen to you. Renbachian shook his head slightly. What Qi Zixia said was right. Such a surrender letter could indeed reduce a lot of resistance. After all, even the emperor had surrendered. What else could the people below do? This surrender letter could disintegrate the fighting spirit of many people. This should be Qi Zixiao's trump card in exchange for some conditions. Renbachian didn't expect him to throw it out before even seeing the Empress. It seemed that they had completely collapsed after being locked up for a few months. However, it was normal when he thought about it. After all, he was the emperor of a nation. He didn't even think that such a thing would happen to him, let alone encounter it. Even an ordinary person would be on the verge of collapse after being locked up for a few months, let alone an emperor who had grown up in the palace and hadn't experienced any storms. Out of curiosity, Renbachian didn't leave immediately. Instead, he went to the other cells to see the pale-looking concubines. These looked much more normal, at least much more normal than the Empress. After leaving the dungeon, Renbachian felt his whole body relax. The dungeon always felt a little oppressive, and even walking around in it made him feel uncomfortable. The feeling from the outside was much better. In particular, in order to welcome the Empress's wedding and coincidentally coinciding with the new year, many aborigines came from other places with a large number of rare items from the mountains. There were also teams from the Jing tribe and the Yun nation who came to deliver gifts. Lan City was almost overcrowded. There hadn't been such a lively time in the past 2 years. As the date of the wedding approached, the atmosphere in the city became more and more cheerful. At the same time, the increase in the number of people in the city was proportional to the number of fights, making the Public Order Bureau extremely busy. After returning to the palace, Renbochin reported the matter to the Empress. She looked at the computer screen and was speechless. Renbochin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" Renbochin yelled in her ear. Bang! Renbochin plastered himself to the wall again. Chapter 825. The news of Hong Wu's return finally drew the Empress's attention away from the TV series. After all, Hong Wu had helped her secure the throne back then, so she still had deep feelings for him. If he found out that she had been watching TV series, he would inevitably nag her. Although the Empress had already secured the throne and Hong Wu was no match for her, many things couldn't be measured this way. "If General Hong Wu wants to see you later, bring him here directly," the Empress said to Axianjia. As soon as Hong Wu entered the city, someone brought the news. After Axianjia left, Renbochin asked, "Your Majesty, what should we do with the former emperor of the Yun nation? How was the situation after you met him today?" The Empress asked. Renbochin looked resentful as he recounted the situation again. "He seems fine, but he is probably going to collapse after being ignored for so long. Is there anything you want to get from him? For example, a jade seal or some other treasure? I don't think he will dare to say no." "What do you want that for?" the Empress asked casually. The Yun nation was gone, so what was the use of the jade seal? If it was a rebellion, she might be interested in it, but she wasn't interested at all. As for his surrender, it's dispensable. "My army can naturally suppress everything," the Empress continued. "This will save us some trouble. After all, the Yun nation has existed for so many years, and many people are loyal to the royal family. If he comes forward to surrender, it can break the fighting spirit of some people and save us some effort. It can also show your generosity," Renbochin said. "In that case, it makes sense. It's fine to let him live the rest of his life in peace. Let him write a surrender letter and surrender in front of the palace in a few days. Let my people and the people of the Yun nation see it. After that, find a house for him to retire in and arrange some experts there. He might even be able to catch some fish," the Empress said after some thought. "Got it, I will arrange it tomorrow. You can leave these things to others." The Empress raised her head and looked at Renbochin. In half a month's time, the person in front of her would be her husband. She would spend the rest of her life with him. Renbochin didn't say anything and let her look. He reached out and placed her hand in his palm. At present, Renbochin's palms were twice the size of the Empress's. When he held her hand, it was almost enough to envelop her entire hand. Renbochin glanced at the computer at the side and still wanted to tell the truth. "Your Majesty, you have changed, where?" The Empress raised her head and looked straight at him. Did he realize that she was treating him more gently? After all, they were about to get married. Moreover, he was quite satisfied with this person. "You are becoming more of a homebody." Renbochin sighed. If she was on Earth, she would be an otaku. Fortunately, she's not a fujoshi. The Empress snorted and pulled her hand out of his bare paw. She looked at him coldly and wondered if she should paste him to the wall or the ground. However, no matter how much of a homebody His Majesty is, he is still the Majesty that later generations will call the Emperor of all ages. Who said that the Emperor can't stay at home? Renbochin's tone changed. There are so many emperors who don't step out of their doors. They can't even step out of the palace twice in their lifetime. What's wrong with Her Majesty watching TV series? What's wrong with being a shut-in? Who couldn't have some hobbies? If anyone dares to say no, I will be the first to slap him. The Empress muttered, I feel that what you said wasn't good. How is that possible? I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart, Renbochin said righteously. In any case, I don't think it was good. The Empress had always been an idealist. Bang! When Hongwu came in, Renbochin was still trying to pull himself out of the wall. Greetings, Your Majesty. Hongwu bowed as soon as he entered the room. His eyes were glued to Renbochin. General, you are back. It must have been a tough journey. The Empress laughed. Renbochin worked hard on the wall for a long time. He used his elbow to enlarge the hole in the wall and was finally able to escape. He turned around and saw that there were several holes in the wall. 2 were from today, 1 was from yesterday, and the other 2 were from the day before yesterday. They were still blocked with wooden planks. The Empress's control of her strength was getting better and better. She didn't even feel any pain when she was pasted to the wall. Of course, it could also be that she was becoming more resistant to beatings. I will ask the Ministry of Works to send someone to repair the wall, Renbochin said faintly. This palace is like a sieve. The Empress glared at him and said, Aren't you the one who provoked me? Her tone didn't sound angry. Both of them were used to it. Hongwu was in a good mood when he came to see the Empress as soon as he came back. However, after hearing the Empress's tone, he immediately felt unhappy. After Renbochin left, Hongwu said, Your Majesty, you are too accommodating to him. The Empress pursed her lips and smiled. She was suddenly very charming. It can't be considered accommodating. I'm used to it. Your Majesty, you have changed. Hongwu couldn't help but say. You are the Aboriginals' Empress. The Empress was a little absent-minded after hearing 2 people say that she had changed in one day. However, Renbochin was deliberately teasing her, and Hongwu was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Everything in this world is changing, the Empress said faintly. In the past, she wasn't interested in men. Although she wasn't interested now, it wasn't bad to have someone to accompany her. In the past, she always felt that the palace was cold, but she hadn't felt that way for a long time. Ever since she chose her husband, she started to change. There were many more things in her life. There was one more person, more mechanical dogs, more television dramas, more comics, more desserts, more candies, more going to the other world every now and then, and more walking on the streets like an ordinary person. She didn't dislike such changes. Those television dramas were very interesting. Comics were also quite interesting. After thinking about it, the Empress smiled. Hongwu felt that he had never seen such a smile on the Empress's face before. He should be happy. However, when he thought of that fellow, his mood immediately turned sour. How's the situation in the north now? The Empress didn't want to talk about this matter and changed the topic. Although they could contact each other through the radio station, she still wanted to hear Hongwu's story. Currently, the flames of war are everywhere in Great Xia. 30% of the prefectures are in disarray, and Great Xia can't even take care of itself. Given the momentum of this disarray, even if Great Xia can suppress it, it won't be able to recover within 10 years. Not to mention, given the current situation, it's hard to say whether Great Xia can survive this ordeal. Currently, there are only 50,000 soldiers stationed at Tiesuo Pass. If Your Majesty wishes, I can send troops to the north at any time. At this point, Hongwu asked, Your Majesty, do you have any connection with those rebels? There is indeed a connection, but it's not with me. It's with Renbochin. The Empress shook her head. Those rebels still owe me 100 million taels of silver. Hongwu took a deep breath. 100 million taels of silver was equivalent to more than 10 years of income for Dao's national treasury. Subsequently, the Empress told him about the deal between Renbochin and Su Qing. In any case, Great Xia can be at peace this way. As for the money they owe, they shouldn't dare to renege on their debt. Hongwu suddenly realized why the news of Tianjing Basin being completely pacified hadn't been announced. They concealed the news of Tianjing Basin and then released a stink bomb in Great Xia's palace, forcing Great Xia to send troops to the south again. This caused Great Xia to be unable to make ends meet and increased taxes repeatedly. Following that, the disarray caused Great Xia to be unable to recover within 10 years, regardless of whether they won or lost. This method was truly amazing. Not only was there no worries in the north, but he was also able to devote all his energy to pacifying the Yun nation. If these things didn't happen, Great Xia would naturally be able to deploy troops to the south and secretly support the rebels of the Yun nation. Now, they were powerless even though they wanted to. Even though Hongwu didn't like Rinpochen, he had to admit that this method was really amazing. Chapter 8:26. There were still 6 days to the new year and 7 days to the wedding. While the entire Lan city was in a state of jubilation, everyone from the Yun nation looked worried. They had been in Lan city for a week, but the Empress had yet to summon them. It wasn't a big deal for thousands of people to feed their horses. Even if their daily meals were several times more expensive, it was just a small amount of money to the people of the Yun nation. The reason why the Empress didn't summon them made them feel restless day and night. If the Empress didn't want to see them, their positions in the Yun nation would be unstable. Even if he was in charge of a city, he might lose his head one day under the iron hooves of the barbarian army. Perhaps they didn't even need the barbarian army. As long as the news got back, the rebels would take their heads first. Mr. Lin, what do you think of the current situation? The few of them sat together and discussed softly. Most of the people in this group were the sons of the first wives of various cities or aristocratic families. After all, the warlords had to deal with political affairs. Without the Empress's summons, they didn't dare to leave the city. On the other hand, the son of the first wife was of sufficient status. Not only could he express his loyalty, but he could also find no fault with him. Before coming here, every family had repeatedly reminded their sons not only to present gifts, but also to find a backer. When they came, they were also full of confidence, thinking that those barbarians had never seen anything good. As long as he took out some valuable treasures, the barbarians would be unable to move their eyes away. Even if it was a little painful, it was worth it no matter how much it cost. But after a few days, their hearts sank. The Empress didn't want to see them, and so did many of the ministers. They had gold and jewels in their pockets, but they didn't even have a way to send them off. At this moment, the few of them were gathered together to discuss countermeasures. The person who was addressed as Mr. Lin had a special status. He was Lin Mengxing. Back then, he had tried his best to convince the warlords of the various cities to surrender, and his name was hung on the Empress's desk. This time, he had come along with everyone. Qi Zixia won't even want to see us, right? These barbarians are really arrogant. A young man with red lips and white teeth said with a frown. The others frowned and moved further away from him. You must call him your majesty. Don't say what you shouldn't say. Otherwise, it will bring disaster to your Qin family. If you're courting death, don't drag us down with you. The few young men said coldly. The young man from the Qin family was taken aback. Seeing everyone's expressions, he recalled the Shi family's request and said unwillingly, "It's my fault for speaking without thinking. We're all on the same side here. Don't spout nonsense." An Earthwill expert's eyes and ears are so sharp that ordinary people can't compare to them. They can easily distinguish the sound of a mosquito from dozens of meters away. Do you know how many Earth and Spirit Will experts there are in Lan City? Lin Mengxing asked faintly. These words were said with good intentions. Everything about them being on the same side was nonsense. If selling out the Qin family could stabilize the position of the others, they could tie up all the members of the Qin family and send them to the palace in less than a quarter of an hour. He didn't know if the Qin clan really didn't have anyone else, but they actually sent a disciple like this. Everyone had their own thoughts, and one of them said, "Not only does His Majesty refuse to see us, even those ministers refuse to see us. I've sent over a dozen name cards, but they've all sunk into the sea." Lin Mengxing was well aware of what these people were doing. He simply said, "Her Majesty didn't summon you, and those officials don't know her intentions. Naturally, they won't meet you. Mr. Lin, do you have any good ideas?" Everyone looked at him. Lin Mengxing's wisdom was indeed extraordinary. If he hadn't contacted the warlords of the various cities, the destruction of the Yun nation would have been slower. However, all that was left of them now were bones hanging on the city walls. Before coming here, many of their families had instructed them to ask for Lin Mengxing's opinion. No matter how much credit he had made, he couldn't possibly be on the same side as the Aboriginals and would definitely stand on the side of the people of the Yun nation. There was no doubt about this. Just like how the people of Tianjing Basin thought of him back then, they also believed that he would definitely draw them over to his side and form a force that belonged to him. However, Lin Mengxing's starting point was much lower than that of Ren Baqian. It was probably the difference between the 18th floor and the basement. Everyone thought that Lin Mengxing would be chosen, but the Empress hadn't summoned him yet. His treatment was no different from theirs. "Wait," Lin Mengxing said. In fact, he was also guessing the Empress's thoughts and had some ideas, but he didn't say them out loud. Everyone had different expressions. It was the word "wait" again. This Lin Mengxing was nothing more than this. Along the way, everyone agreed that he was quite intelligent, but they didn't feel that he was much worse than them. At this moment, it seemed that he was just as helpless as they were. While everyone was thinking about their own thoughts, there was a sudden sound of hurried footsteps outside. A young man who looked like a servant rushed in and said, "Young masters, Mr. Lin, the Empress has written a letter of surrender and surrendered." Everyone immediately understood that this was the former emperor of the Yun nation, their former boss. Lin Mengxing's eyes lit up. When did this happen? It's on the way to the palace now, and the people outside are spreading the news. We can still make it if we go now. A smile appeared on Lin Mengxing's face. "I think Her Majesty will summon us tomorrow." "How do you know, Mr. Lin?" someone immediately asked. There were also some who had a pensive look on their faces. The emperor of the Yun nation had been kidnapped for more than half a year, right? These days, everyone had carefully inquired about it, but they didn't get any useful information. Now that there was suddenly news of the emperor's surrender, it was going to be a good show. It was a good show for the people of Dayo and the Yun nation, but it was also a good show for them. "Mr. Lin, do you want to go and take a look?" a young man asked. "You guys go ahead, I won't be going." Lin Mengxing shook his head. This was a carnival for the Aboriginals and the end of an era. From now on, the Yun nation would completely become history. No matter how much he hated Qin Dongxing and Jing Qingmian, he was still a citizen of the Yun nation. Afterward, everyone dispersed in twos and threes. Some people returned to their rooms with a sad look on their faces. Some people remained calm and headed to the palace. Just as Lin Mengxing thought, this was a carnival for the Aboriginals. Even though the Yun nation had been completely occupied more than half a year ago. The surrender of the emperor of the Yun nation seemed to be useless. Regardless of whether he surrendered or not, the Yun nation had already become history. In fact, in the hearts of many people, the emperor of the Yun nation represented the Yun nation. The surrender of the emperor in front of the palace meant that the Yun nation had completely surrendered. Ren Baqian accompanied the Empress as they stood on the tower of the palace. He made way for her and looked down at the man below. He was now wearing the attire of the Emperor of the Yun nation. After all, it didn't look good for him to submit the surrender in a prisoner's uniform. Although everyone knew that he was the Emperor of the Yun nation, he was lacking a lot of things without that set of clothes. This was probably the last time he would wear it. With the importance of Emperor Yao, you are the master of the crusade. Your strategies are godlike, and your authority is unparalleled. I dare not compare to the generosity of Emperor Yao and the benevolence of the people. Chen Dongxing stood in the square in front of the palace, and his voice was spread throughout the audience through a loudspeaker. From Chen Dongxing's clothes to the position where he surrendered, Chen Dongxing surrendered in front of the palace, the Empress accepted his surrender at the top of the city wall, and the loudspeaker. All of this was naturally arranged by him. Renbaqian even helped him polish up his surrender form a little. With this sentence, today, I, Chen Dongxing, beg for forgiveness. Thank you for listening. The curtains completely fell on the Yun nation. In Lan City, wild cheers resounded through the sky. That night, a grand banquet was held in the palace. The two old men, Tong Zhenye and Qin Chuan, stripped naked, revealing their muscles. They wore animal skins below their waists and wrestled in the banquet hall. Hong Wu stripped his upper body, grabbed Renbaqian's neck, and forced him to drink 5 kilograms of sorghum wine. Gulp. Gulp. I'm going to. Gulp. Drown. Cough, cough. Before Renbaqian fainted, he firmly believed that Hong Wu was definitely doing this on purpose. He looked at the Empress with his hazy eyes for help, only to see her drinking by herself and smiling at him from time to time. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.